I used to think the worst thing that could happen while camping was getting lost. It isn't. The worst thing is finding the same sign, the same sound, or the same mark waiting for you somewhere it should not be. Because sometimes the woods are not hiding you. They are helping something keep track of you. Comment your location and the time you're watching from. I had been to that campground 3 times before, which is probably why I ignored the first thing that felt wrong. It was one of those state forest campgrounds tucked just off a 2-lane mountain road, close enough to hear traffic. If the wind shifted, but far enough that your phone became almost useless after sunset. I got there on a Friday in late October, when the leaves were already down and most of the summer campers were gone. There were only a few sites taken. An older couple had a small trailer near the restroom building. A family in an ERV was parked at the top of the loop. My site sat near the start of a short trail that circled down by the creek and came back behind the campground office. That trail was the reason I liked the place. It was easy, maybe 2.5 miles. I had walked it before with no problem. I had a paper map from the kiosk, a flashlight clipped to my belt, bear spray in my jacket pocket, and my car parked less than 30 yards from my tent. Nothing about it felt risky. I set up camp, ate half a sandwich, and decided to walk the loop before it got dark. 5 minutes in, I saw the first arrow. It was painted on the side of a pine tree, bright yellow, pointing left. At first, I barely thought about it. Trails get repainted, volunteers come through, rangers change markers. That was normal. What was not normal was how fresh it looked. The paint still had a wet shine to it. One thick drip had run down the bark and stopped on a curled brown leaf near the roots. I remember looking at that leaf for a second too long. Then I stepped over it and followed the arrow. The trail dipped almost right away. That was one of the things I remembered about it. The first stretch moved downhill through thin pines, then cut toward the creek before looping back around the ridge. In daylight, it felt more like a nature walk than a hike. There were wooden steps in the steep places. A few old trail blazes on the trees, nothing complicated. After I followed the yellow arrow, I started seeing older marks again. Most of them were faded white rectangles chipped away by weather. Some were barely visible unless the light hit them right. That made me feel better. It meant I was still on the official trail, or at least close to it. The creek got louder below me. The air smelled wet and metallic the way it does when leaves rot under cold water. I remember checking the time on my phone. It was 5:18. Sunset was still a while off, but under the trees everything already looked dim. About 15 minutes later, I reached a muddy section. A shallow wash had crossed the trail and turned the ground into dark clay. Someone had laid 2 branches across it, but they had sunk halfway in. I did not want to soak my shoes before spending the night in a tent, so I took a narrow side path that curved around the mud. It looked like other people had done the same thing. That was the excuse I gave myself. The side path only went maybe 70 feet before it bent left, through a cluster of small pines. I could still hear the creek. I could still see where the main trail should have been through the trees. Then I saw another yellow arrow. It was painted on a skinny pine trunk at about shoulder height. It pointed left. For a few seconds I just stood there, trying to make it normal in my head. Maybe volunteers had marked the detour. Maybe this was still part of the loop. Maybe the trail map was older than I thought. But this arrow had the same thick drip running down from the bottom edge. Not similar, the same shape, same slight curve to the right, same heavy drop near the end, like whoever painted it had held the brush there too long. I took my phone out and snapped a picture. I told myself it was just so I could ask about it later. As soon as I lowered the phone, I heard something behind me. A small metallic clink, like the lid of a paint can touching stone. I stood still for a few seconds after that sound. The woods did not move. Nothing stepped out from behind the trees. No one laughed. No one called back. The creek kept running below me, and somewhere farther up the hill, a bird made one sharp sound and went quiet again. I turned slowly and looked behind me. There was no paint can, no volunteer, no ranger in a bright vest. Just the narrow path I had come down with leaves pressed flat where my shoes had passed over them. I almost called out, then I stopped myself. Calling out felt too much like admitting I was scared, and I still had no real reason to be scared. A wet arrow was strange. A metallic sound in the woods was strange, but strange was not the same as dangerous. Not yet. I put my phone back in my pocket and started walking toward where I thought the main trail should be. The side path looked shorter when I first took it. Now it felt like it had stretched. The small pines were tighter together. The ground sloped a little more than I remembered. I had to step over a fallen branch that I was almost sure had not been there a minute earlier. I told myself I had just missed it. That happens in the woods. You notice things differently when you turn around. After another minute, I saw yellow again. This arrow was on an oak tree, not a pine. It was lower than the others, almost at waist height, and it pointed away from the creek, away from the campground. I stopped so fast my boot slid in the leaves. For a while, I just stared at it. I tried to fit it into something normal. Maybe the trail loop curved wide before coming back. Maybe I had misread the map. Maybe the arrows were not pointing toward camp at all, just around the official loop. But I knew that was not right. The paper map showed one main trail and one creek crossing. No extra loop, no marked detour, no lower trail, and definitely no yellow blazes. I took the map out anyway and unfolded it with one hand. The paper cracked in the cold air. I traced the line with my thumb from the campground loop to the creek bend and back up to the office. It was simple, too simple to mess up this badly. I looked back at the arrow. There was a smear beneath it, like someone had dragged one finger through the wet paint. That bothered me more than the arrow itself. Trail markings are boring on purpose. Clean rectangle, simple blaze, something anyone can follow. This looked personal, rushed, like it had been put there for one person. For me. I folded the map and decided not to follow it. That was the first smart thing I did. I turned my back on the arrow and walked toward the sound of the creek instead. Water made sense. Water had to run downhill. The campground was above the creek, but the trail crossed it and came back around. If I could reach the bank, I could follow it until I found the wooden footbridge. I walked faster, not running. I did not want to run. Running in fading light on wet leaves is how people break ankles and spend the night waiting for help that never comes. But I moved with purpose. 30 steps later, I saw another arrow. It was not ahead of me this time. It was beside me, on a thin tree so close to my right shoulder that I could have touched it without leaning. The arrow pointed in the same direction I was already walking. For a second, my mind refused to understand what that meant. It had not guided me there. I had not followed it. I had chosen that direction myself after deciding not to trust the markers. And somehow the marker was still there, right beside me, pointing after the choice had already been made. I stared at it until my eyes started to water from not blinking. The paint looked fresh enough to shine in the dim light. A small drop hung from the bottom edge, swollen and heavy, not ready to fall yet. I reached out before I could talk myself out of it. I touched the lower corner of the arrow with my thumb. The paint came away wet, bright yellow, sticky, and still warm from whatever hand had put it there. That was the first moment I stopped trying to make it normal. I looked at the yellow paint on my thumb, then back at the arrow beside me. It should not have been wet. Even if volunteers had come through that morning, even if they had marked some unofficial detour, the paint should have started drying by then. This was not tacky. It was fresh enough to smear. I wiped my thumb on a dead leaf and listened. The woods were quiet in that careful way they get before dark. Not silent, just thin. Water over rocks below me. A crow somewhere far off. A soft wind moving through branches that had already lost most of their leaves. I could still hear the campground road if I held my breath long enough, but it sounded farther away than it should have. I took out my phone and checked the compass app. The arrow pointed south. The campground was west. That was enough for me. I stopped trusting the marks completely. I folded the paper map back into my jacket pocket, pulled my flashlight from my belt, and took the bear spray out with my other hand. I did not run. Running in the woods before dark is how people break ankles. I just started walking toward the sound of the creek because water was real. Paint on trees was not. About 30 yards downhill, I saw the shoe print. It was pressed into the damp black dirt beside a flat rock. Not a hiking boot, not a ranger boot. It looked like a sneaker, almost smooth on the bottom, with only a few shallow lines across the sole. Along the outer edge was a thin smear of yellow. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I noticed there were more of them. They did not follow the trail. They curved around the place where I had been standing, a half circle in the leaves, like someone had moved quietly around me while I was looking at the arrow. I wanted to call out again. I almost did, but something about that half circle stopped me. I kept moving downhill. The creek was close enough now that I could see dull flashes of water between the trees. The ground got softer. Twice my foot slid under wet leaves. I was starting to think I had made the right choice when I saw one more yellow mark on a fallen tree near the bank. It was not shaped like an arrow this time. It was just a thick line pointing straight down. Below it in the mud was one of my own footprints from earlier. I knew it was mine because the heel had that broken notch from my right shoe. Inside that print was another print, the sneaker print. Someone had stepped exactly where I had stepped, after me, close enough to know which mark was mine. I stopped breathing for a second. Then from somewhere uphill behind me, I heard that small metallic sound again, a lid closing on a can. I came out of the trees near the restroom building, not at the trailhead where I had started. That was the first thing that made me feel truly sick. I knew the loop. I knew where it was supposed to come out. The trailhead was beside the campground office near a brown sign with a plastic map case. The restroom building was on the other side of the loop, closer to the RV sites. For a few seconds, I just stood there in the yellow light over the bathroom doors, breathing too hard and trying not to look back. I could hear a generator from the RV at the top of the hill. I could smell somebody cooking over charcoal. Normal campground sounds, normal evening sounds. An older man was walking a small black dog along the gravel road. The dog stopped when it saw me. It did not bark. It just planted its feet and stared past my shoulder back toward the trees. The man asked if I was all right. I told him I had gotten turned around on the trail. I tried to laugh when I said it. It came out wrong. Then I mentioned the yellow arrows because I needed someone else to make it ordinary. He looked toward the woods and frowned. He said they had repainted the markers that spring, white rectangles, not yellow. I did not sleep in the tent that night. I sat in my car with the doors locked and the dome light off, watching the tree line above my sight. Nothing came out. No one walked past. No flashlight moved between the trunks. Around midnight, I convinced myself that made it worse. In the morning, I packed before sunrise and drove to the kiosk by the campground office. A woman in a park vest was restocking maps. I told her about the arrows. I kept it simple. I said some trail markers looked fresh and confusing, and that one might be leading people off the loop. She came with me to check. We found the trailhead. We found the creek path. We found the muddy wash. But the first yellow arrow was gone. So was the second one. No wet paint. No drips on leaves, no sneaker print with yellow along the edge. The staff woman looked annoyed in the polite way people do when they think you wasted their time but do not want to say it. I almost apologized. Then I remembered the picture. I opened my phone and found the photo I had taken on the side path. The timestamp was there, 5:34 p.m. The yellow arrow was there too, bright and wet looking on the skinny pine. But the background was wrong. Behind the tree, I could see my blue tent. I could see the corner of my folding chair. I could see the gray tarp I had laid under my cooler. The arrow had not been on the side path. It had been painted on a tree just behind my campsite. The staff woman stopped looking annoyed after that. She asked me to send her the photo. I did. Then I left. I did not wait for an explanation because by then I understood that any explanation would either be too small or too much. 3 days later, I unpacked my backpack at home. There was dried yellow paint on the inside of the small front pocket, not outside, inside, right along the seam where I kept the folded paper map from the kiosk. The map was still there, but it was folded differently than I remembered. When I opened it, a small yellow arrow had been painted near the campground loop. It pointed directly at my campsite. I remember the bell because it was too small to be scary at first. Megan and I got to the campground a little after 4 on a Saturday afternoon. It was one of those lakeside places that looked safer than it probably was. Not remote enough to feel dangerous, not crowded enough to feel annoying. There were maybe 8 or 9 sites taken, most of them near the boat ramp, with trucks backed up beside aluminum fishing boats and folding chairs set out around cold fire rings. Our site was halfway between the water and the restroom building. That was why Megan picked it. Close enough to walk to the bathroom without a flashlight if we had to. Far enough from the RVs that we still felt like we were camping. The car was parked right beside the picnic table. The lantern worked. Our phones had one bar if we stood near the road. Nothing about it felt risky. We set up the tent before dark. I started a small fire while Megan unpacked the cooler. Across the loop, a family was cooking hot dogs beside a camper, and somewhere near the lake, a man laughed loud enough for the sound to carry over the water. Then I heard it. Ting. It was light and thin, like a little brass bell. The kind people put on a cat collar or at the end of a fishing rod to tell when something bites. I looked toward the trees on the right side of our site. Megan glanced up from the cooler and said, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, but I did not move. There were too many normal explanations. A dog collar, fishing gear, a wind chime from another campsite. Sound does strange things near water, especially when the air gets cold. So I let it go. A few minutes later, while I was breaking kindling over my knee, it rang again. Ting. This time it came from behind the picnic table, closer than the trees. Megan stopped what she was doing. I remember her holding a pack of paper plates in both hands, just staring past me. I smiled because I thought that would make it feel less weird. Probably somebody's dog, I said, but there had not been any barking. And when I looked around the loop, I did not see a dog anywhere. After dinner, Megan wanted to walk down to the water before it got too dark. That was normal for us. We did not go camping to sit in one spot the whole night. The boat ramp was maybe 100 yards from our site, just past the restroom building, and a row of empty parking spaces. There was still a little light in the sky, and I could see the white roof of an RV through the trees, so it did not feel like we were wandering off into nowhere. We left the lantern on at the picnic table and took one flashlight with us. The lake was calm when we got there. Too calm maybe, but I only think that because of what happened later. At the time, it just looked like black glass with a little fog sitting low over the surface. There were 2 old folding chairs near the ramp, a crushed beer can by the gravel, and a faded sign warning people not to clean fish there. Megan stood near the water and said it was quieter than she expected. Then the bell rang again. Ting. It came from the bushes beside the ramp. I turned the flashlight that way. The beam caught wet leaves, a few thin branches, and the corner of a plastic tackle box someone had left behind. Nothing moved. No person stepped out. No dog collar flashed in the light. There was no little wind chime hanging from a branch, which was what I had half expected to find. Megan said maybe someone was fishing from the bank. That made sense. People do that. They sit in the dark with a cooler and a headlamp and stay quiet for hours. I called out, not loudly, just enough that I would not scare someone if they were there. "Anybody down there?" Nobody answered. I moved the flashlight farther along the shore. No rods, no tackle bag, no headlamp, no extra car at the ramp. The only truck nearby was the one I had seen earlier with the boat trailer, and it was parked all the way up by the SAR RV loop. The bell rang again. This time it did not come from the bushes. It came from behind us on the road back to our campsite. Megan turned before I did. I remember that because her face changed before I understood why. She was not terrified yet, just annoyed in a way that meant she was trying not to be scared. "Let's go back," she said. I agreed right away, not because I thought we were in danger. I told myself sound carried strangely across water. I told myself some kid was messing around near the sites. I told myself it was better to be near the car and the fire than standing at the dark edge of a lake. When we got back, the fire was still burning. The lantern was still hanging from the hook beside the picnic table. But it was swaying, just a little. There was no wind. We went back to the campsite faster than we had walked away from it. Neither of us said that out loud. We did not run. We did not panic. We just stopped looking at the lake and started paying attention to every sound behind us. The gravel under our shoes suddenly seemed too loud. The little insects near the water seemed too quiet. Even the firelight through the trees looked different, like it was farther away than it should have been. When we got back, everything was still where we had left it. The fire was low, but alive. The lantern was hanging from the metal hook beside the picnic table. Megan's sweatshirt was still folded on the bench. My cooler was still latched. Nothing had been opened. Nothing had been moved. That helped for about 10 seconds. Then I heard the bell again. It came from near my car. Just one clean little sound. Ting. Not loud, not dramatic, but close enough that both of us turned at the same time. My car was parked at the edge of the gravel pad, maybe 15 feet away from the picnic table. The windows were dark. The doors were locked. I could see the little red blink of the security light on the dash. I walked over with my flashlight and checked around the tires. I expected to find something stupid. A keychain caught under the wheel, a beer can tab in the gravel, some little piece of trash moving when the air shifted. There was nothing. Megan stayed by the fire with her arms folded tight across her chest. She was trying to look annoyed instead of scared. I knew that look. She used it when she did not want me to make something worse by overreacting. I told her it was probably sound carrying across the water. She said maybe, but she did not sound like she believed it. A few minutes later, she said she wanted to use the restroom before we got in the tent. The restroom building was not far. You could see the yellow light over the door from our site. There were other campers between us and it. That was the reason I did not tell her no. It would have sounded ridiculous. We were in a public campground, not the middle of nowhere. I walked with her anyway. We made it about halfway down the path before the bell rang from the trees beside the restroom. Megan stopped. I raised the flashlight and swept it through the brush. The beam caught wet leaves, a trash barrel, the corner of a wooden sign, and nothing else. Then the bell rang again. This time it came from behind us, back toward our site. Megan whispered my name. I remember that more clearly than the sound itself. She did not ask what it was. She did not say she was scared. She just said my name in a way that meant she wanted me to stop pretending there was a normal explanation. We turned around and went back to the picnic table. The moment we reached it, the campground went quiet again. No bell, no footsteps, no movement in the trees, just the fire popping softly and someone laughing far away near one of the RVs. For a minute, I almost convinced myself that was the answer. Kids. A prank. Some camper's child with a little bell hiding just outside the flashlight beam. Annoying maybe, but not dangerous. Then Megan said very softly, "It only rings after we move." I wanted to argue with her. I could not. I crouched beside the picnic table and shined the light underneath it. At first I only saw dirt, old leaves, and the shadow of the bench legs. Then something thin flashed in the beam. Fishing line. It was stretched tight around one of the table supports, so clear I almost missed it. I reached under and touched it with 2 fingers. The bell rang directly beneath the tabletop, right next to my ear. I kept my hand on the fishing line for a second longer than I should have. It was so thin I could barely feel it. If the lantern had not been hanging low beside the table, I probably would have missed it completely. The line ran from one table leg to the next, then disappeared through a narrow gap between the boards underneath. It was not tangled there by accident. It had been pulled tight. I told Megan to hold the flashlight steady. She did not ask why. She just stepped closer and pointed the beam under the table. For a few seconds, all I saw were old gum spots, spider webs, and the dark underside of the wood. Then the light caught something small and dull gold. It was a bell, not a big one, not the kind you would hang on a porch. It was the size of something you would put on a cat collar or the end of a fishing pole. Brass scratched with a little slot cut into the bottom. It was tied under the picnic table with clear fishing line tucked back where nobody would see it unless they were looking from the ground. I reached under and touched it. It made the same sound. Ting. Megan stepped back so fast her heel hit the fire ring. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I wanted to make it harmless. I really did. Maybe some kid had tied it there earlier that day. Maybe the people before us had used it to keep raccoons away from their food. Maybe it had been there for weeks and the wind had just been catching it at the right angle. But there was no wind. And that did not explain the boat ramp. It did not explain the sound by my car. It did not explain why it only seemed to ring after one of us moved. I cut the line with my pocket knife and held the bell in my palm. The knot was tight and clean, not like something a child had done. The fishing line looked new. There was no rust on the bell, no dirt packed into the slot. It had not been under that table all season. Megan said just in that instant said, we should allow service, we should leave. I agreed. At least I agreed in the way people agree when they are scared but still trying to stay reasonable. We were in a campground. There were other campers somewhere across the loop. There was a restroom building with lights on. There was no person standing in front of us. No threat we could point to. Nothing we could explain to a sheriff without sounding ridiculous. Still, I got in the car and drove up toward the entrance. The gate was closed. A metal bar stretched across the road with a small red reflector on each side. Beside it was a sign that said the gate was locked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Emergency exit only. Alarm will sound. I sat there with the headlights on the sign while Megan stared through the passenger window. We could have used the emergency exit. I know that. If someone had been chasing us, I would have driven through anything I had to. But at that moment, all we had was a bell, a sound, and a bad feeling that was getting harder to laugh off. Driving tired down a mountain road in the dark did not feel smart either. So we made the least stupid choice we had. We drove back to the site. We packed our phones, wallets, keys, bear spray, and a small overnight bag. We left the tent standing. Then we locked ourselves inside the car and decided to wait until morning. I put the brass bell in the cup holder between us. 5 minutes later, while Megan was pulling her jacket over her knees, the same sound came from inside the tent. Ting. We did not sleep after that. Megan got in the passenger seat with her knees pulled up, still wearing her jacket. I sat behind the wheel with the keys in my hand, even though I knew the gate was locked. I kept telling myself that if anything actually happened, I would drive straight through the emergency exit and deal with the alarm later. That made me feel better for maybe 5 minutes. The campground went quiet in that heavy way places get quiet after midnight. The RV at the boat ramp had its lights off. The older truck across the loop was dark. Our tent sat about 20 feet ahead of us, half lit by the last orange glow from the fire pit. The picnic table was beside it, empty, normal looking, like nothing had been tied under it at all. I kept the little brass bell in the cup holder. I do not know why. I think I wanted proof that we were not scaring ourselves. It was right there between us, dull and scratched with the fishing line still wrapped around it. Every few minutes, Megan looked at it like she expected it to move. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the sound again. Ting. It did not come from the woods. It did not come from the tent. It came from somewhere behind the car. I froze with my hand halfway to the ignition. Megan whispered my name, but I did not answer. I checked the rearview mirror first. Nothing. Then the side mirrors. Nothing but darkness and the faint outline of trees behind the campsite. I turned on the rear camera. The screen showed the gravel behind my bumper pale and grainy in the backup light. For a second, there was nothing there. Then something thin caught the light near the lower edge of the screen. A line. Clear enough that I almost missed it. It stretched across the gravel behind the car. Then it went slack. Megan saw it too. She covered her mouth with both hands and leaned back like the dashboard was the only thing keeping her inside the vehicle. I did not get out. That is the one part I am still proud of. I did not open the door. I did not check the bumper. I did not try to find whoever was doing it. I started the car, turned on the headlights, and kept it running until sunrise. When the gate opened at 6, we drove straight to the campground office. The woman working there listened politely at first. Then I put the brass bell on the counter. Her face changed a little, not fear exactly, more like recognition she did not want to explain. She called another staff member, and the 3 of us went back to our site together. The bell under the table was gone. The fishing line was gone too. Our tent was still zipped. The cooler was still beside the fire ring. Nothing looked stolen. But behind my car in the loose dust near the bumper, there was a long, curved drag mark, like a thin line had been pulled tight, then dragged away toward the trees. The staff member took a picture of it. He said raccoons sometimes got into fishing line. No one believed him. We packed fast. I left the last bundle of firewood behind. I did not fold the tent properly. I just shoved it into the trunk with the stakes, the tarp, and the damp ground cloth. Megan did not speak until we were 20 miles away. She said that bell wasn't meant to scare us. I asked what she meant. She said it was meant to know when we moved. I did not have an answer. We got home that afternoon. I carried the camping gear into the garage and left most of it there. I did not want to touch any of it, but the trunk smelled like lake mud, so eventually I opened the tent bag to let it dry. That was when I heard it, ting. It came from inside the small canvas pouch where we kept the tent stakes. I remember standing there for a long time before I opened it. There was a brass bell inside, not the same one I had put on the office counter. This one was cleaner, newer, tied to a short piece of clear fishing line with the same tight knot I had seen under the picnic table. I checked every pocket after that. The map was still there, the lantern batteries, the extra rope. Nothing else was missing. Only added. We did not bring it home. Something made sure it left with us. My dad and I had not camped together in almost 6 years. There was no dramatic reason for that. Work got in the way. Family things happened. Weekends disappeared. Then one Thursday in early fall, he called and asked if I still had my old tent. He said the weather was supposed to hold until Sunday, and there was a state forest campground about 2 hours from both of us that still had open sites. I almost said no. Then I heard how casual he was trying to sound, and I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. The campground was the kind of place he liked. Nothing fancy, a gravel loop road, a self-pay station near the entrance, a restroom building with a buzzing light above the door, a faded map under cloudy plastic. There were maybe 8 other sites taken when we pulled in on Friday afternoon. A couple of RVs near the front, a blue tarp stretched over a picnic table 2 sites down. A camp host trailer sat near the office, but I never saw anyone come in or out of it. Our confirmation slip said Site 23. Dad found it before I did. He drove slowly around the loop, one hand on the wheel, reading the wooden posts the way he used to when I was a kid. 19, 20, 21. Then the road curved past a stand of hemlocks, and there it was. Site 23 was actually a good spot. Not too close to the bathrooms, not buried at the far end of the loop. The car could park beside the tent pad, and the picnic table was level. There was a fire ring with old ash in it, and the trees behind the site were thin enough that we could see a slice of the road through them. Dad shut off the engine and nodded once. "This'll work," I agreed. It felt normal, safe even. The only thing that stood out was the post. Every other campsite marker we had passed was weathered gray, cracked down the sides with numbers that looked sunburned and half rubbed away. The post for Site 23 looked newer. The wood was lighter. The black paint on the numbers was thick, almost glossy, like someone had gone over it more than once. I noticed it when I clipped our permit into the little plastic sleeve below the numbers. Under the bottom curve of the 3, there was a scrape in the paint. Not much. Just a thin pale line like something older had been covered and then scratched through. Dad was already unloading the tent poles, so I did not mention it. I just pushed the permit deeper into the sleeve and told myself the post had probably been replaced. We spent the next hour doing ordinary things. My father backed the truck into the gravel pad close enough that the tailgate almost faced the picnic table. I unfolded the tent while he checked the fire ring for old nails and glass. That was something he always did. He had stepped on a rusty bottle cap during a trip in Virginia when I was 12, and after that he never trusted a campsite until he had walked it once with his eyes down. Site 23 was actually a good spot. It sat on the outer curve of the loop with trees behind it and enough distance from the restroom building that we would not hear the door slamming all night. Site 22 was empty. Site 24 had a small camper with the shades drawn and 2 folding chairs beside the door. Farther up the loop, I could see a blue tarp stretched over a picnic table at Site 21, but nobody was sitting under it. Nothing felt deserted. That mattered. There were other people close enough to make the place feel safe, but not close enough to ruin the quiet. After we got the tent up, I walked to the water spigot near the front of the loop. I passed the other campsite markers on the way. Most of them were old wooden posts, gray from weather, with numbers burned or painted on flat metal plates. Site 19 leaned slightly toward the road. Site 20 had a cracked plastic permit sleeve. Site 21 had moss growing up one side of the post. That made our post look even stranger. It was not just newer, it looked placed. The wood was too clean. The edges were too square. The black number 23 had been painted thick enough that it caught the last light when I turned back toward our site. I filled the jug at the spigot and told myself not to make a thing out of it. By the time I returned, my father had started the fire. He was sitting at the picnic table sorting through a small bag of kindling, and for a few minutes the trip felt exactly like it was supposed to feel. Cold air, wet leaves, smoke drifting low before it rose. My father complaining that the firewood sold at the campground office was always half damp. Then a truck came around the loop. It was an older dark pickup with one headlight slightly dimmer than the other. It moved slowly, slow enough that both of us looked up without meaning to. The driver did not stop. I could not see a face through the windshield, just the reflection of trees and the pale square of the campground map posted near the entrance. The headlights swept across our site. For 1 second, the light hit the post marked 23. The black paint shined, not like old paint, not like numbers that had been there for months, like it was still settling into the wood. The truck kept going and disappeared around the bend. My father watched the empty road for a moment, then looked at me. Did he slow down at our site? I said maybe he was looking for his number, but the truck never came back around. The trail behind the campground was barely a trail. It started as a cleared path near the dumpster enclosure, then narrowed between 2 rows of rhododendron before dropping toward a shallow creek. My dad said it looked like the kind of trail people used more for walking dogs than actual hiking. He was right. There were no steep climbs, no warning signs, no reason to feel anything except bored. We took 1 bottle of water each. I had my phone. My dad had a folding knife clipped to his belt because he always did. We left most of our gear at camp and told ourselves we would be back before the firewood really caught. About 10 minutes and the path split. The left side kept following the creek. The right side went uphill toward an older trail blocked off with a sagging rope tied between 2 trees. There was a faded sign hanging from the rope that said "Closed for restoration." It looked old enough that I wondered if anyone had restored anything there in years. That was when my dad stopped. He was looking past the rope. A wooden campsite post stood about 15 feet beyond the closed trail, planted in the ground beside a cluster of wet leaves. It was marked 23. For a moment, neither of us said anything. It was not leaning against a tree. It was not thrown there like scrap wood. It was upright, straight, and set deep enough into the dirt that it looked installed. Same pale new wood, same thick black numbers, same small scrape under the 3. My dad let out a short breath through his nose. Probably an old marker, he said. I wanted to agree with him. I really did. Campgrounds had spare signs. Maintenance crews moved things. People made mistakes. A duplicate number was strange, but not impossible. Then I looked at the ground around the post. The leaves had been pushed away in a rough circle. The dirt at the base was darker than the surrounding trail. Fresh, wet, like someone had dug the hole recently and packed the mud back in by hand. I took a picture. My dad noticed and frowned a little. "What are you doing?" Just in case we ask someone, I said. He nodded, but I could tell he did not like that answer. Not because it was wrong, because it meant we both understood there was something to ask about. We stood there for another few seconds, listening to the creek move over rocks below us. I remember hearing a bird call once from somewhere uphill. Then nothing. My dad said we should keep walking for a few more minutes and loop back around. It was still daylight. We were not lost. The campground was close enough that I could almost smell someone else's campfire when the wind shifted. So we kept going. We followed the left side of the trail along the creek and tried to talk about normal things. My dad complained about the price of firewood. I said the tent stakes were bent. Both of us were pretending the post behind the rope was just another weird campground detail. Maybe 5 minutes later, the path curved back toward the closed spur. I expected to see the post again through the trees. It was gone. The rope was still there. The closed for restoration sign still hung between the trunks. The wet leaves were still pushed aside in a rough circle. But the wooden post marked 23 was no longer standing there. Only a narrow hole remained in the dirt. My dad stepped closer to the rope, then stopped himself before crossing it. He looked down at the hole for a long time. Then he looked back toward the direction of our campsite. He did not say anything. That was the first time I realized he was scared too. We walked back faster than we had walked in. Neither of us said that out loud. My dad still held himself the same way he always did. Shoulders relaxed, one hand near his pocket, like nothing in the world could rush him. But he kept looking over his shoulder, not every few steps, just enough that I noticed. When we reached the campground loop again, the first thing I looked for was our site marker. It was still there. The wooden post marked 23 stood beside the gravel pad, just where it had been when we left. The plastic sleeve still held our permit. The picnic table was still slightly crooked. The cooler was still tucked underneath it. Our tent was still zipped shut, the rainfly moving a little in the wind. For a second, that almost made things worse. If the post at the closed trail had been the same one, it should not have been here. If it had been a spare, then someone had carried it away in the 5 minutes between us passing it and coming back. Either explanation made me feel stupid for trying to explain it. My dad went straight to the fire pit and started moving the half-burned logs around with a stick. Could be maintenance, he said. I knew he did not believe that. There's no truck, I said. He looked up the loop. So did I. The camp host trailer sat quiet near the entrance with no porch light on. The old white pickup we had seen earlier was gone. The family in the RV at Site 19 had their blinds closed. A little blue tarp flapped at Site 22, but nobody was outside. My dad set the stick down. Show me the picture. I unlocked my phone and opened the photo I had taken at the closed trail. The post filled most of the frame. The number 23 was clear. The scrape under the 3 was clear too. I started to hand the phone to him, then stopped. Something in the background was wrong. Behind the post there should have been trees, the sagging rope, the closed trail sign. Instead, in the lower corner of the photo, I could see the edge of our picnic table. I zoomed in with 2 fingers. There was the blue cooler under it. There was the black handle of my dad's coffee mug sitting near the edge. There was the corner of our tent blurred but unmistakable just beyond the post. My dad leaned closer. For a while he did not move. That's our table, he said. I nodded. He took the phone from me and looked from the screen to the post beside our site, then back to the screen. I watched his face change in a very small way. Not fear exactly. More like he was trying to keep a door shut in his head, and something had already gotten a hand through it. It could have loaded wrong, he said. Photos don't load the wrong background. I know. That was all he said. A light rain started about 20 minutes later. Not heavy, just enough to make the gravel dark and the picnic table shine under the lantern. Leaving right then would have meant packing a wet tent in the dark and driving down a narrow forest road with fog already forming between the trees. We had done that kind of road before. It was not something you did just because a picture looked strange. That was the reason we gave ourselves. Other campers were still nearby. Our car was close. We had signal if we walked up toward the entrance. And nothing had actually threatened us. No person, no voice, no damage to the tent or car, so we stayed. But we changed how we stayed. We put the cooler and food bin in the back seat. We moved our wallets, keys, phones, and my dad's medication into the car. We folded the camp chairs and leaned them against the passenger door so they would scrape if anyone moved them. My dad checked the tire pressure with his thumb, even though that made no sense. I think he just needed something practical to do. Before we went into the tent, I looked at the post again. The permit was still inside the plastic sleeve, but it was pushed deeper than before. When I had clipped it in that afternoon, the top corner stuck out slightly. I remembered because I had tapped it flat and it had sprung back up. Now it sat all the way down inside the sleeve, pressed smooth against the wood, like someone had taken 2 fingers and slid it carefully into place. I do not think either of us really slept. The rain stayed light, but it never stopped. It tapped against the rainfly in a steady rhythm and made every other sound harder to place. A branch would drip. The tent fabric would shift. Gravel would settle under runoff near the edge of the pad. Each little noise gave my brain something to explain and then something else to doubt. My dad lay on the far side of the tent with his jacket still on. I knew he was awake because his breathing never got heavy. He had one hand outside his sleeping bag, resting near the small flashlight he kept beside him. I had my phone under my pillow, even though there was barely 1 bar of signal inside the tent. Sometime after midnight, the rain softened. That was when I heard the gravel. Not a scrape, not an animal brushing against leaves. A slow crunch, then another. It came from the direction of the fire ring. My dad's hand closed around the flashlight, but he did not turn it on. I held my breath and waited for the sound to move past us the way a lost camper might walk by after taking a wrong turn in the dark. It did not move past. It stopped, right near the campsite post. For maybe 10 seconds there was nothing but rain. Then my dad whispered, "Probably someone looking for their site." I wanted that to be true. There were still other campers in the loop. People got confused at night. Someone could have walked over from site 22 or 19, seen our marker, and realized they were in the wrong place. But nobody said anything. Nobody called out an apology. Nobody shined a light across the tent. Nobody made the normal embarrassed yings people make when they know they have wandered too close to someone else's campsite. My dad slowly unzipped the tent window less than an inch. He did not open the door. He did not step outside. He did exactly what I would have done if I were trying to check without making things worse. Through that narrow gap, I could see the fire ring, the wet picnic table, the side of my car dull under the clouded night sky, and the postmark 23. At first, I thought the rain was making it look different. Then I realized what was wrong. It was closer. The post was no longer beside the edge of the gravel pad. It stood several feet nearer to the tent planted in the damp ground just outside the fire ring. Close enough that if I reached out through the tent door, I could have almost touched it. My dad closed the window. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I remember feeling my phone in my hand and seeing the screen glow against my palm. No service, not even enough to send a text. I thought about opening the tent and running to the car, but the car was on the other side of the post. I thought about shouting toward the RVs, but if someone was standing outside our tent, I did not want to tell them exactly how scared we were. So we waited. That part is hard to explain to people who have never been afraid in a quiet place. Waiting feels stupid afterward. In the moment, it feels like the only thing that does not immediately make the situation worse. The gravel crunched once more, then nothing. Near dawn, the rain finally stopped. My dad was the first one out of the tent. He had the flashlight in one hand and the folding knife in the other, closed but ready. I followed him with my phone up recording video because I wanted proof of something, anything. The post was still near the fire ring. Behind it, where it had originally stood, there was a dark hole in the wet ground. Around that hole, the gravel had been scraped into a half circle, as if the post had been dragged before being lifted and set down again. There were no footprints clear enough to follow. The rain had softened everything, but there was a long, shallow line in the mud between the old spot and the new one. My dad crouched beside it. "Pack the car," he said. He did not say it loudly. He did not say it like he was panicking. He said it the way he used to say things when a storm got too close to the house and we needed to get inside. I started with the sleeping bags, then the duffel, then the cooler from the back seat. We did not fold anything correctly. We did not make breakfast. We left half the firewood stacked beside the table. Before we pulled out, my dad walked to the post and took our permit from the plastic sleeve. He looked at the front, then turned it over. There was a dark smudge on the back of the paper. Not mud, not rain. It was too oily for that. It looked like a fingerprint. One black fingerprint pressed directly over the line that said, "Departure date." We were out of that campsite in less than 15 minutes. That sounds fast until you realize how little we cared about packing correctly. The tent went into the trunk wet and half collapsed. The sleeping bags were shoved on top of it. My dad left the extra firewood beside the picnic table. I left a cheap blue tarp folded under the bench because bending down to get it would have put my back toward the post. Neither of us said anything about that. When we pulled out of Site 23, my dad drove slower than usual. Not because he wanted to look around, because the gravel loop was slick from the rain, and he was the kind of man who could be scared and still refuse to drive badly. I looked in the side mirror as we passed the restroom building. The postmark 23 was still standing near our fire ring. Then we reached the bend by the trail entrance. There was another one. A wooden post stood just off the path, half hidden behind a wet rhododendron bush. The number 23 faced the road, black and clean against pale wood. My mouth went dry. "Dad," I said, "I see it." He did not slow down. He did not stop. He did not ask me to take a picture. He kept both hands on the wheel and drove past it like looking too long would count as an invitation. At the exit kiosk, the campground office was still closed. The small window had a sign taped inside that said "Staff returns at 9 a.m. Beside it was a metal drop box for permits and payment envelopes. My dad parked with the engine running. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he held the permit out to me and said, "Drop it in." I did not want to touch it. That sounds childish, but I did not. The paper was damp at the edges. The black fingerprint on the back had smeared slightly, but it was still shaped like the pad of a thumb. I took it anyway. I walked to the drop box, keeping my eyes on the office window. There was no one inside, no movement behind the glass, no camp host, no ranger, just a corkboard with old notices and a faded map of the loop. I slid the permit into the box. The metal flap clapped shut louder than I expected. By the time I got back into the car, my dad had already shifted into drive. We did not talk until we were on the highway. Even then, we did not talk about the post. We talked about gas, breakfast, whether the tent would mildew if we left it packed too long, normal things, cowardly things, things people talk about when they are trying not to give shape to what just happened. For years, I did not tell that story. How would I even say it? My father and I got scared by a campsite number. That was the sentence. That was all it became when I tried to explain it in my head. Two grown men left a campground early because a wooden post moved in the rain. A few days later, I got the email receipt. It came from the state reservation system. Automated, plain, nothing dramatic. It thanked us for staying and listed the campground name, the date, and our assigned site. Site 23. I almost deleted it. Then I noticed there was an attachment at the bottom. It was a scan of the paper permit we had dropped in the box. The front looked normal at first. Our last name, my phone number, the license plate, the arrival date, the departure date, but the site number line had been changed. The original number was crossed out in thick black ink. Beside it, someone had written 23, the same number, not a correction. Not a new assignment, just 23 written over 23 like the first one had not counted until somebody else marked it. I stared at the scan for so long that my eyes started to blur. Then I saw the edge of the paper near the bottom. There was a small black smudge there, the same fingerprint shape from the back of the permit. And beside it, almost too faint to notice, someone had drawn a tiny arrow in pen. It did not point toward the campground name. It pointed toward the line with my home address. The cooler was the first thing Dylan took out of the truck. Not the tent, not the sleeping bags, not the firewood we had paid too much for at the gas station out town. The cooler came first because, according to Dylan, nothing ruined a camping trip faster than warm drinks and bad hot dogs. It was an old red Coleman cooler with a cracked corner and silver duct tape wrapped around the handle. One side had a faded brewery sticker that had been peeling for years. Dylan had brought it on every trip since college, and he treated it like some kind of family heirloom, even though it smelled permanently like melted ice and cheap beer. There were 3 of us on that trip: Dylan, Marcus, and me. We had reserved a site at a small river campground in northern Idaho, not far from the main road, but far enough that the trees swallowed most of the traffic noise. It was late September. The campground was half empty. A few sites had trucks parked beside them. Someone had a camper trailer near the vault toilet. Another group had a blue canopy set up closer to the boat launch. It did not feel remote. That was part of why we picked it. We wanted a quiet weekend, not a survival story. Our site had a picnic table, a fire ring, a flat tent pad, and enough room to park the truck with the tailgate facing camp. The river was maybe a 2-minute walk downhill through the trees. Marcus had offline maps on his phone. I had a flashlight clipped to my backpack. Dylan had the cooler packed with hot dogs, beer water bottles, and 2 bags of ice. We set it beside the picnic table when we unloaded. I remember that clearly because Dylan told Marcus not to drag it over rocks and scratch the bottom. Marcus told him the thing already looked like it had been thrown off a bridge. After that, we did normal camp chores. Marcus and I got the tents up. Dylan messed with the firewood and complained that half the kindling was damp. The sky was still light, but the sun had dropped behind the ridge, and everything under the trees had that early evening blue color that makes a campsite feel colder than it is. Then Dylan stopped near the fire ring and said, "Who moved the cooler?" I looked over. The red cooler was no longer beside the picnic table. It was sitting near the fire ring, maybe 8 or 10 feet away from where we had left it. The handle was folded down. The lid was closed. Nothing had spilled. For a second, none of us reacted like it mattered. Marcus said he had not touched it. I said maybe Dylan moved it without thinking. Dylan got annoyed and said he would remember moving his own cooler. That was how we explained it at first. One of us had moved it and forgotten, or the ground was uneven, or maybe an animal had nudged it even though the cooler was heavy and the latches were tight. Then I noticed the dirt. There was a thin drag mark running from the picnic table toward the fire ring. Just one narrow line, like one corner of the cooler, had scraped across the dry ground. But there were no shoe prints beside it. No paw marks either, just the line stopping exactly where the cooler sat. We stood around the cooler longer than we should have. Not because we were scared, not yet. It was more irritating than anything. The kind of small, stupid thing that makes 3 adults start accusing each other because none of them wants to admit they forgot doing something. Dylan grabbed the handle and pulled the cooler back beside the picnic table. "There," he said, "nobody touch it unless you say something." Marcus raised both hands like he was surrendering. I laughed a little because it still felt laughable then. A cooler moving 10 feet did not mean anything. Campgrounds were uneven. People forgot things. We had been driving for most of the day and all of us were tired. By the time we got the fire going, the drag mark was already getting harder to see in the dust. We ate early because Dylan wanted to check the river before dark. He had brought a cheap collapsible fishing rod and kept talking about getting up at sunrise, as if any of us believed he would wake up before 8. The river was close. We could hear it from the site moving fast over rocks somewhere downhill. Marcus said we should look at the bank before morning, so nobody slipped half asleep with a tackle box in one hand. That made sense. We left the cooler beside the picnic table. I remember seeing it there when we walked away. Red plastic, silver duct tape, brewery sticker facing the fire ring. The path to the river started behind our site and dipped through tall pines. It was not a real trail, more like a worn route made by campers cutting down to the water. Dylan walked first with his fishing rod case. Marcus had the flashlight even though it was still light enough to see. I followed behind and kept looking back at camp because the thing with the cooler had made me more aware of our stuff than usual. We reached the riverbank in maybe 10 minutes. It was a shallow rocky stretch with dark water moving around flat stones. Across the river, the trees rose straight up the hill. There were no cabins, no lights, just the sound of water and the dull orange line of sunset fading behind the ridge. Dylan stepped onto the rocks and pointed downstream. "That's where I'll try tomorrow." Then he stopped. At first, I thought he had seen a snake. He was looking at a flat rock near the water. There was a red cooler sitting on it. For half a second, my brain refused to connect it to ours. Campers own coolers. Red coolers are common. Someone could have left one by the river while fishing. Then Marcus turned the flashlight on. The beam hit the handle, silver duct tape, same wrap, same torn edge where the tape had folded over itself, same cracked corner on the left side, same faded brewery sticker peeling away from the plastic. Dylan whispered no. Nobody answered him. He walked toward it slowly, like getting closer would change what we were seeing. The cooler sat squarely on the rock with the lid shut and the handle folded down. It was not wet. It was not scratched up. It did not look like it had slid down the bank or floated in from somewhere else. It looked placed. Dylan opened the lid. Inside were our hot dogs still in the plastic. 2 beer cans, 3 water bottles, both bags of ice barely melted. One of the bottles had Dylan's name written on the cap in black Sharpie, because he always did that, and then accused other people of drinking his water anyway. Marcus turned and looked back toward the trees. "Did you bring it?" Dylan asked him. Marcus stared at him. With what hand? That was when I looked down at the rock beneath the cooler. The stone around it was damp from river mist, except for a clean, dry rectangle underneath exactly the size of the cooler's base. It had been sitting there long enough to leave a mark. Dylan grabbed the handle. Marcus told him to leave it. Dylan said he was not leaving our food by the river for some idiot to steal. I wanted to argue, but the thought of walking away from it felt wrong too. If someone was messing with us leaving the cooler, there meant letting them keep part of our camp. So we carried it back. Dylan held one side, I held the other. Marcus walked behind us with the flashlight pointed into the trees. The walk back felt longer. It could not have been more than 10 minutes, but carrying that cooler made every step slower. Dylan kept adjusting his grip on the handle, muttering that the thing felt heavier than before. I told him that was because we were walking uphill. Marcus did not say anything. He stayed a few yards behind us, sweeping the flashlight through the trees on both sides of the path. The river made it hard to hear anything else. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. If someone was walking behind us, we might not know until they were close enough to touch one of our backs. Every cracked branch became part of the water. Every shift in the brush became wind. When we finally saw the weak orange glow of our fire through the trees, I felt relieved. Then we stepped into the campsite. Everything looked normal at first. The tents were still standing. The truck was still locked. The camp chairs were where Marcus had left them. Smoke curled low from the fire ring because the wood had started to smolder instead of burn. And beside the picnic table, exactly where Dylan had put it, before we walked to the river, sat the red cooler. Dylan stopped so suddenly that my hand slipped off the handle of the one we were carrying. It hit the dirt between us with a heavy thud. None of us moved. The cooler by the picnic table was closed. The handle was down. The cracked left corner faced the fire. The brewery sticker peeled away from the side in the same loose crescent shape. Marcus stepped past us, slow, keeping the flashlight on it. "That was there when we left," he said. Dylan shook his head. No, we brought it with us." He pointed down at the cooler on the ground like that proved something. It did prove something, just not something any of us wanted to understand. For a minute, we tried to solve it the way people try to solve things, before they let themselves be afraid. Maybe Dylan had 2 coolers. He did not. Maybe the one by the river belonged to another camper. It had Dylan's water bottle inside. Maybe someone had taken ours, copied it, and put it back. Nobody said that out loud for long because it was worse than the problem. Marcus walked to the picnic table cooler and opened it. Inside were hot dogs, beer water bottles, and 2 bags of ice. Dylan stepped forward and looked in. Then he opened the cooler we had carried from the river. Same thing. Hot dogs, beer, water bottles, ice. There was one difference. In the cooler by the picnic table, the ice had melted more. The water level was higher, and the cardboard sleeve around the hot dogs had softened at the edges. In the cooler from the river, the ice was cleaner and almost too solid, like it had just come out of a freezer. Dylan reached into the river cooler and picked up one of the water bottles. His name was written on the cap. Dylan, same black Sharpie, same crooked Y, same little smear on the end where his thumb must have hit the ink before it dried. He put it back without drinking from it. Marcus said, "We need to leave." Dylan looked at the 2 coolers, then at the tents, then at the truck. "I had 1 beer," he said. It sounded stupid until I understood what he meant. The road out of the campground was narrow and dark with a drop-off near the first bend. Marcus could drive, but the truck was Dylan's, and Dylan was the kind of guy who got stubborn when fear made him feel embarrassed. I also knew what leaving meant, abandoning half our gear. explaining why later, admitting that 3 grown men ran from a campsite because of a cooler. So, we made the kind of compromise people make when they know they are scared, but still want to call it being careful. We put the food in the truck. Both coolers went in the bed first. Then Marcus changed his mind and said he did not want them outside where someone could reach them. So we moved them into the trunk space under the camper shell, wedged behind the duffel bags and sleeping pads. Dylan locked the tailgate. Marcus checked it twice. We decided we would sit in the truck for a while with the doors locked. If nothing else happened, we would sleep in shifts or drive out when Marcus felt comfortable taking the road. If anything else moved, appeared, or made noise, we were leaving and the tents could stay behind. That was the rule. We had just turned off the cabin light when something sounded from the direction of the river. A dull plastic thump, like an empty cooler being set down on stone. Nobody moved after that sound. All 3 of us sat in the truck with the doors locked and the cabin light off. Dylan was in the driver's seat, both hands on the wheel, even though the engine was not running. Marcus sat beside him with his phone in one hand and the flashlight in the other. I was in the back seat, turned halfway around so I could see the campsite through the rear window. The fire was almost out. The picnic table looked black and wet in the low light. The tent stood beyond it, still and useless. The river kept making its constant rushing sound behind the trees, pretending nothing had happened. Then the thump came again. This time it was not from the river. It came from the direction of the restroom path. Closer. Marcus whispered something I did not catch. Dylan started the truck. The headlights came on and cut across the gravel loop, the trees, the edge of the vault toilet building, and the narrow path that led back to the campsites on the far side. A red cooler sat at the edge of that path, not tipped over, not half hidden, sitting upright. The silver duct tape on the handle caught the headlights. Dylan made a sound that was almost a laugh, but not enough of one. "That's not possible," he said. Marcus told him to drive. Dylan did not. He just stared through the windshield at the cooler like if he looked long enough, it would become something else. I turned and checked the back through the small camper shell window. I could not see much through the tinted glass, only the dark shapes of our bags. But I knew we had put both coolers back there. I had watched Marcus shove them behind the sleeping pads. I had heard Dylan lock the tailgate. "There are 2 in the back," I said. Marcus looked over his shoulder at me. "You're sure?" "No," I said, but I was. That was the most honest answer I had. Marcus told Dylan to pull closer but not get out. Dylan shifted into drive and rolled forward at walking speed. The headlights widened over the cooler. Its lid was slightly open, not enough to show what was inside, just enough to make the black gap visible. No footprints showed on the gravel around it, no tire tracks, no drag mark, just the cooler. Dylan stopped about 10 feet away. Marcus lowered his window 2 inches and aimed the flashlight through the gap. The beam hit the lid, the cracked corner, the peeling sticker. Same sticker, same crack, same strip of tape. The air coming through the window smelled cold and damp, like river rocks and wet leaves. "Don't touch it," Marcus said. Nobody argued. Then the lid shifted. Not much, just a small lift as if something inside had settled. Dylan put the truck in reverse. Before he could back up, I saw paper inside the cooler, a folded white piece wet at the edges sitting on top of ice. Marcus saw it too. He told Dylan to keep the truck running. Then he opened his door just enough to reach out with the long metal marshmallow skewer he had left in the cup holder earlier. He did not step out. He leaned from the seat, hooked the paper with the skewer, and dragged it across the gravel toward the truck. It tore once before he got it close enough to grab with 2 fingers. He shut the door hard and locked it again. The paper was soaked and cold. It left a wet mark on his jeans. For a second, none of us wanted to unfold it. Then Marcus did. There were only 3 words written on it in thick black marker. "You left 1." Dylan said, "Left 1, what?" Nobody answered. That sentence opened too many doors at once. We left 1 cooler. We left 1 person. We left 1 thing behind by the river. We left 1 of something we were supposed to bring back. It was the kind of message that felt worse because it did not explain itself. Marcus folded the paper once and dropped it on the floor mat like it might leave a stain. "We're done," he said. That time Dylan did not argue. We did not get the tents, we did not grab the chairs, we did not collect the cheap lantern on the picnic table. Dylan drove straight back to our site only long enough for Marcus and me to jump out and grab wallets, keys, phones, and Dylan's medication bag from the tent entrance. We did it with the truck headlights pointed at us and all 4 doors open. I remember looking at the picnic table as I ran back. No cooler beside it, no cooler near the fire ring, just the dying coals and the drag mark in the dirt darker now under the damp air. When I got back into the truck, Dylan hit the lock button before my door was fully closed. Then something shifted behind us, a heavy slide inside the camper shell. All 3 of us heard it, not a bag falling over, not loose gear. It was the sound of hard plastic dragging across truck bed liner. Dylan did not check the mirror. He did not ask what it was. He just drove. Dylan drove faster than he should have, but not fast enough to lose control. That is one of the details I still remember clearly. He was scared. We all were. But he kept the truck between the shoulders of that narrow campground road and slowed down at the bend where the gravel dropped away on the passenger side. Fear did not make him reckless. It made him quiet. Nobody looked back. The sound in the camper shell did not happen again, and somehow that made it worse. If something had kept sliding around back there, we might have been able to blame loose gear, a sleeping pad, a duffel bag, one of the coolers shifting because Dylan braked too hard. But after that one heavy drag, there was nothing. We passed the campground sign, then the self-pay station, then the dark shape of the dumpsters near the entrance. The road turned from gravel to cracked pavement. Trees crowded both sides. For about 5 miles, there were no houses, no headlights, no place wide enough to pull over without putting half the truck in the ditch. Marcus kept saying, "Don't stop." Dylan did not. The first real light we saw came from a gas station at the edge of a small town. It had 2 pumps, a soda machine outside, and a yellow sign buzzing over the door. Dylan pulled in beside the pump closest to the building. He parked under the brightest light and left the engine running. For a few seconds, none of us got out. Then Marcus said, "We have to check." He was right. Not checking would have meant driving another 2 hours with whatever was in the back riding with us. So, we got out together. Dylan kept the keys in his hand. I stood near the passenger side with my phone ready, though I had no idea who I planned to call first. Marcus unlocked the tailgate. He lifted the camper shell window slowly. The truck bed was messy but normal. Sleeping bags, 2 duffels, a folded camp chair, the tackle bag, a plastic bin with paper plates and propane canisters. No cooler, not one. Both coolers we had locked back there were gone. Dylan climbed halfway into the truck bed and shoved the bags aside like he expected them to be hiding underneath. He pulled out the sleeping pads, the chair, the plastic bin. Nothing red, no ice water, no duct tape, no beer cans rolling loose. The bed liner was dry except for one long wet smear running from the front of the truck bed to the tailgate. It looked like something heavy had been dragged across it. Marcus took a picture before Dylan could wipe it with his sleeve. Inside the gas station, the clerk barely looked up when we came in. He was an older man with gray hair and a baseball game playing on a small TV behind the counter. Marcus asked if there was a ranger station nearby. The clerk said the sheriff's office handled calls from that campground after hours. We called. Telling the story out loud made it sound ridiculous. 3 guys, a moving cooler, a note, missing gear. I heard myself explaining it and wanted to stop halfway through because I knew how it sounded. But the deputy who called us back did not laugh. He asked if anyone was hurt. He asked if we had seen a person. He asked if we still had the note. We did. Marcus had left it folded on the truck floor mat. When he picked it up under the gas station light, the ink looked thicker than before, like it had soaked deeper into the paper. You left one. The deputy told us to stay in town and not return to the campground that night. That was the easiest instruction I have ever followed. The next morning, a ranger and a deputy checked our site. They found the tents, the chairs, the lantern, the half-burned wood. Nothing had been damaged. Nothing had been stolen except the coolers, if stolen is even the right word. They did not find the third cooler near the restroom path. They did not find the note's source. They did not find tracks that meant anything. Other campers said they had heard the river, a truck leaving late, and nothing else. Dylan was angry for 2 days after that. Then he got quiet about it. Marcus never joked about the trip. I kept waiting for one of them to admit it had been a prank or a story we had all inflated because we were tired. That never happened. About a week later, Dylan sent a picture to our group chat. No message at first, just the picture. It showed the concrete floor of his garage. A small wet streak ran out from under the metal shelving where he kept camping gear. On the shelf above it was a plastic bin, a propane stove, and a coil of extension cord. Stuck to the edge of the bin was a strip of silver duct tape. Old tape, wrinkled, torn at the end where it had folded over itself. The same way it had been wrapped around the cooler handle. Dylan sent one line after the picture. I threw that cooler away in college. Then he deleted it. I do not know where the red cooler came from. I do not know how many of them there were. I do not know what we left behind or what something thought we had taken. But I still check the back of my car after every camping trip. Not because I expect to find gear missing, because some part of me is waiting to see that old red plastic again, sitting there in the dark, like it was packed by someone who knew exactly where I was going next. The man at the entrance knew I was alone before I told him. That is the part I keep coming back to. Not his face, not his voice, not anything dramatic he did later. Just that one small thing spoken so casually that I almost let it pass as normal. I reached the campground a little after 6 on a Friday evening in late September. The delay was my fault mostly. I had left work later than planned, then hit road construction on the mountain highway where traffic moved in one lane behind a flagger. By the time I turned onto the forest road, the sun was already low enough that the trees cut the light into strips across my windshield. The campground was remote in the way people imagine remote. There was a wooden entrance sign, a map board, a self-pay station, and a camp host trailer parked near the first bend of the loop. A few RVs were already settled in. I saw a couple cooking at a picnic table, a family stacking firewood, and one man walking a dog near the restroom building. That made me feel better. I was camping by myself, but I had picked that place because it was managed, not backcountry, not dispersed camping off some unmarked logging road. My blue Subaru would be parked right beside my tent. My phone had weak service near the entrance. There were other people close enough to hear if something went wrong. I pulled in beside the map board and got out with my reservation email open on my phone. Before I could find my site number, the door of the camp host trailer opened. An older man stepped out wearing a brown canvas vest over a flannel shirt. He moved slowly, not in a threatening way. More like someone who had spent the whole day doing small campground chores and was tired of standing up. He had a clipboard in one hand and a pencil tucked behind his ear. "You checking in late?" he asked. I said yes and started to give him my last name. He glanced at the clipboard and said, "Blue Subaru, right." I stopped with my mouth half open. My car was blue. It was also the only Subaru sitting by the entrance, so I told myself that was all it meant. Camp hosts watch vehicles come in. Reservation systems asked for license plates. None of that was strange if you wanted it not to be. He ran his finger down the clipboard. "Site 18, he said. "Upper loop, easy pull-in, restrooms close." He handed me a printed permit in a clear plastic sleeve. My name was on it. My license plate was on it. The date was right. Everything looked official. I thanked him and started back toward my car. Halfway there, I looked down at the permit again. Near the bottom under the notes section, one short line had been printed in smaller text. "Arrived alone." I stood there for a second holding the paper while the campground sounds moved around me. A dog barking once, a cooler lid closing, someone laughing from an RV site. Then I folded the permit against my chest and told myself it was probably a safety note. For solo campers, for people like me. Site 18 was not bad. That was the problem with it. If it had been obviously unsafe, I would have gone back to the entrance and asked for a different spot right away. But it was just uncomfortable enough to make me hesitate. The site sat on the upper loop not far from the restroom building. A gravel pull-in curved beside a picnic table, and a fire ring made from blackened stones. The tent pad was flat. The trees gave enough privacy on two sides. My car fit close enough that I could reach the driver's door in a few steps. By every normal camping standard, it was fine. The restroom light was the only thing I did not like. It flickered every few minutes, bright white, then dull yellow, then bright again. Each time the door opened, the hinges made a long metal groan that carried across the loop. I could hear people walking past my site, even when I could not see them. Gravel crunching, coolers opening, someone coughing near the water spigot. I clipped the permit into the plastic sleeve on the post and started setting up my tent. For the next 20 minutes, I talked myself down. A site near the restroom was safer. People were nearby, my car was close. If I needed help, I would not have to scream into empty woods. Still, while I pushed the last tent stake into the ground, I found myself looking toward the lower loop. The campground map said it curved down toward the creek. More trees, fewer sites, farther from the restroom. I remember thinking that if I had known Site 18 was this close to the building, I might have asked for something down there instead. I did not say that to anyone. After I got the tent up, I walked back to the camp host trailer to buy firewood. The older man was not outside at first. His trailer porch was dark except for a small yellow bulb above the steps. A folding table sat beside the door with a metal cash box, a stack of firewood tags, and a few campground forms weighed down by a smooth river stone. One bundle of firewood was already sitting beside the table. On top of it was a paper slip. The trailer door opened before I knocked. "I figured you might want the lower loop instead," he said. I looked at him, then at the paper. He smiled, but not too much. That almost made it worse. He did not look proud of guessing. He did not look like he was trying to scare me. He looked like a man saying the most ordinary thing in the world. "I'm okay for tonight," I said. He nodded like he had expected that answer too. 18 gets a lot of foot traffic, he said. "Some people sleep better closer to the creek." The paper on the firewood bundle was a site change request. My name was printed at the top. My license plate was printed underneath it. The date was right. The current site line said 18. The requested site line was blank. The signature line was also blank. I told myself there were reasonable explanations. Maybe he knew Site 18 was noisy. Maybe solo campers asked to move all the time. Maybe he printed forms for anyone who came in late. A helpful host would do that. I bought the firewood and left the form on the table. He did not ask me again. When I got back to my site, I noticed the permit in the sleeve had changed position. At first I thought the wind had shifted it. Then I stepped closer and saw it was not the same permit. My name was still there, my plate was still there, Site 18 was still there. But the checkout time had changed. The first permit said 11 a.m. This one said 6 a.m. I stood beside the post with the firewood in my arms, trying to remember if I had misread it the first time. Then the restroom door groaned open behind me and I turned around too fast. A man from one of the RVs walked out carrying a toothbrush and a towel. He did not look at me. Nothing was happening. That was what I kept telling myself. Nothing was happening yet. I stayed at Site 18 for almost 2 more hours. That sounds longer than it felt. Time moves strangely when you are trying to decide whether you are being reasonable or cowardly. I made a small fire. I ate crackers and cheese out of the front seat of my car because I did not feel like setting up the stove. I watched people walk to and from the restroom building and kept telling myself that being near other campers was a good thing. The permit bothered me anyway. 6 in the morning was not a normal checkout time. Campgrounds wanted you out by late morning, not before sunrise. I took a picture of the permit in the plastic sleeve, then took one of the site posts and one of my car beside it. I did not know what I expected to do with those pictures. I just wanted proof that I had noticed. Around 9:30, the restroom light flickered hard and went out for almost 10 seconds. When it came back on, I decided to walk the lower loop. I did not go because I trusted the host. I went because I wanted to see my options while other campers were still awake. I had my flashlight, my phone, my keys, and the small can of bear spray I kept in the side pocket of my jacket. I stayed on the gravel road. I did not cut through trees. I did not leave the campground. The lower loop was quieter right away. The road curved downhill between taller pines, and the sound from the restroom faded behind me. A creek moved somewhere beyond the sites, not loud, but steady. The first few spaces were empty. Site 24 had a flat tent pad, a picnic table, and enough open sky that it did not feel boxed in. It was farther from people, but not isolated. I stood there longer than I should have, picturing my tent beside the table and my car backed into the pull-in. Site 25 had a leaning picnic table. Site 26 sat too close to the road. Site 27 was darker than the others, tucked under trees that made the flashlight beam feel smaller. I remember thinking I would never choose 27. Then I turned around. The camp host was standing at the junction where the lower loop met the upper road. He was not close, maybe 40 yards away. Far enough that I could tell myself he had not followed me. Far enough that calling out would have felt dramatic. He raised one hand in a small wave. I walked toward him because the road out was past him anyway. When I got close enough, he said, "24 is usually quiet." I felt the skin on my arms tighten under my jacket. "I was just looking," I said. He nodded. "Most people don't like 27. Too dark." I had not said a word about Site 27. For a second, I tried to make it normal. Maybe everybody thought 27 was too dark. Maybe camp hosts knew which sites people avoided. Maybe my flashlight had paused long enough at 24 for him to guess. But his voice did not sound like a guess. It sounded like he was confirming something I had already chosen. I told him I was staying where I was for the night. He nodded again and stepped aside before I had to ask him to move. "Signal's better down there," he said. "Down where?" He looked past me toward the lower loop. "By 24. I did not answer. I walked back to Site 18 faster than before, but I did not run. Running would have made it real in a way I was not ready for yet. My tent was still there. My car was still locked. The fire had collapsed into a low orange bed of coals. There was a folded paper tucked under the driver's side windshield wiper. I knew what it was before I touched it. A new permit. Site 24. My name, my license plate, the correct date. Under the notes section it said, "Move voluntarily." I had not signed anything. I had not moved. I took a picture of the permit before I pulled it from the windshield. Then I walked up toward the entrance where the map board listed the campground office number. My hands were shaking enough that I mistyped it twice. The call did not go through. I tried again. Nothing. I was still staring at the screen when the trailer door opened behind me. The host stepped out with his clipboard tucked under one arm. "Signal's better down by 24, he said again. I did not answer him that time. I just stepped away from the map board and walked back towards Site 18. I did not want to argue near his trailer. I did not want to ask why he had printed a permit I had never requested. I did not want to hear another calm explanation that would make me feel foolish for being afraid. The upper loop looked different on the walk back. Nothing had changed in any obvious way. The RVCs were still parked. The restroom lights still hummed. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed at something inside a camper. Normal campground sounds. Safe sounds if I had heard them an hour earlier. But now every normal sound felt like cover. When I reached my site, my tent door was unzipped. Not open all the way. Just a few inches. Enough that the black gap showed under the rainfly. I stopped at the edge of the gravel pad. I knew I had zipped it shut. I had done it twice because the zipper caught near the bottom corner, and I remembered tugging it until the teeth lined up. The little pull tab had been tucked down near the stake loop. Now it hung halfway up. I stood there with my keys in my fist, looking at that opening, and trying not to think about someone kneeling at my tent while I was down at the lower loop. I did not call out. I did not step inside. I used the toe of my boot to push the flap open just enough to shine my flashlight through. Nothing jumped out. Nothing moved. My sleeping bag was still there. My duffel was still by the back wall. My pillow sat where I had left it. Then I noticed the sleeping bag. It had been folded. Not well, not neatly, just folded in half and pushed toward the stuff sack like someone had started packing it for me and stopped. That was when I stopped trying to explain things. I backed away from the tent and went straight to the car. Wallet, phone charger, jacket, medication, bear spray. I threw everything important into the passenger seat. My hands were shaking badly enough that I dropped my keys once in the gravel and had to force myself not to look toward the host trailer while I picked them up. When I turned back, there was a paper on the picnic table. It had not been there before. The sheet was dry even though the table had gathered a thin layer of evening damp. It was another campground form printed in the same plain black font as the others. Departure approved. Below that was my name, my license plate, and a checkout time. 6 a.m. It was not even 10:30. I remember laughing once under my breath. Not because it was funny, because my brain did not know what else to do with the idea of someone approving my departure before I had decided to leave. Then I heard gravel shift near the edge of my sight. The host stood just beyond the fire ring. He had not stepped onto the pad. He was careful about that. His boots stayed on the roadside like there was still a polite boundary between us. His clipboard was under one arm. "You're packing," he said. I put my hand on the open car door. "I'm leaving." He nodded once. "I can help you get moved before it gets too late." "I'm not moving sites." His expression did not change. "The gate locks after 10, he said. I looked toward the entrance road. From where I stood, I could not see the gate, only the curve of gravel leading up toward the host trailer and the dark line of trees beyond it. The way he said it was not a threat. That made it worse. It sounded like information, a rule, something written on one of the signs I had agreed to when I drove in. If I panicked, I would be the unreasonable one. If I stayed, I would be following campground policy. I said I'll use the emergency exit. He looked at my tent, then at my car. "There's an alarm." "I know." For the first time he smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just a small tired smile like I had finally said the line he had been waiting for. I got into the car and locked the doors. He did not move while I started the engine. He did not wave. He did not try to stop me. He just stood beside my fire ring with the clipboard tucked under his arm, watching my headlights brighten the trees. I drove toward the entrance without looking at the lower loop. Near the drop box, something white was taped to the metal lid. An envelope. My name was printed on the front. I should have kept driving. I know that. But the gate was 20 feet ahead of me, and some stupid part of me wanted proof I had not invented the whole thing. So, I stopped with the engine running, cracked the door, and grabbed the envelope without stepping all the way out. Inside was a printed receipt. "Thank you for returning." Not staying, returning. I dropped it onto the passenger seat like it was dirty. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the host trailer was dark. No porch light, no window light, no shape standing in front of it. But something sat on the hood of my car just beyond the windshield wipers. The clipboard. I had not seen it there when I got in. I did not get out to remove it. I drove with it sliding once across the hood, then disappearing under the headlights as I turned toward the gate. The gate was not locked. That should have made me feel better, but it did the opposite. There was a chain hanging across the emergency exit lane, and there was a red sign bolted to the post that said, "Alarm will sound." The chain looked official. The sign looked official. Everything about it told me I was about to do something wrong. But when I got close, I saw the chain was only looped through the latch. No padlock. I put the car in park, left the engine running, and got out just long enough to pull the chain free. My hands were shaking so badly that the metal links rattled against the post. I kept waiting for the alarm to start. I wanted it to start. I wanted lights, noise, attention, anything that proved this was a normal emergency gate in a normal campground. Nothing happened. No siren, no flashing light, no voice from the host trailer telling me to stop. Only the sound of my engine and the soft creak of the gate as I pushed it open. I drove through, got back out, and left the gate hanging open behind me. I did not care about the rule anymore. If there was a fine, I would pay it. If someone called me dramatic, I would let them. The clipboard slid off the hood somewhere on the forest road. I heard it scrape once across the metal, then disappear under the front of the car. I did not brake. I did not look in the mirror. I kept both hands on the wheel and drove until the campground road met the highway. The first place with light was a gas station 20 minutes away. I parked under the canopy, locked the doors, and sat there until my breathing stopped sounding like someone else's. Then I called the county sheriff's non-emergency number. The woman who answered transferred me twice before I reached someone who knew which campground I meant. Explaining it made me feel insane. A camp host gave me the wrong permits. A man knew my car. Someone entered my tent. The gate was supposed to be locked, but was not. There was paperwork with my name on it that I had never signed. The deputy asked if I had seen a weapon. Number? Had the man touched me? No. Had he threatened me? No. Was anything stolen? I looked at the passenger seat. My wallet, phone, jacket, and medication were there. My tent and most of my gear were still back at the site. I don't know, I said. He told me to stay where I was until someone could meet me. A state park officer called me the next morning. By then I had slept 3 hours in a motel room with a chair pushed under the door handle. My phone was full of pictures. Site 18, the changed checkout time, the Site 24 permit, the form that said moved voluntarily, the envelope that said thank you for returning. The officer listened quietly. Then he asked me to describe the host. I did. Older man, brown vest, flannel shirt, clipboard, gray beard but trimmed short, calm voice, trailer by the entrance. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "There isn't a host assigned to that loop right now." I did not understand him at first. He explained that the regular camp host had left almost 3 weeks earlier because of a medical issue. The trailer near the entrance was empty, locked. No one was supposed to be staying in it. The campground was still open, but late season check-ins were self-service until staff came through in the morning. I told him I had spoken to someone there. He said he believed that I had spoken to someone. That was somehow worse. They went back to my site that afternoon. 2 officers and 1 ranger. My tent was still standing at Site 18. My sleeping bag was still folded halfway toward its sack. My firewood was still beside the picnic table. They found no signs of forced entry, no clear footprints, and no clipboard on the road. They did find an envelope in the drop box. It had my name printed on the front. Inside was a checkout slip. No site change request, no official receipt. Just 1 page with my license plate, my arrival date, and a notes section. Returning soon. The officer asked if I had written it. I almost laughed. I had never wanted to return to a place less in my life. For a while, nothing else happened. I replaced my tent because I could not stand the idea of sleeping in it again. I changed the email password tied to my campground reservation account. I checked my car for a tracking device twice, once by myself and once at a mechanic shop, and found nothing. Then 3 weeks later, I got an automated survey. The subject line said, "How was your return stay?" Not your stay, your return stay. The campground name was correct. The date was correct. The site number was not. Site 24. I had never slept at Site 24. I had never even parked there. I had only stood in the road near it with a flashlight, thinking it looked quieter than the others. At the bottom of the email, under the usual rating buttons, there was 1 extra line in smaller text. Your next visit has already been prepared. I forwarded the email to the officer. He told me not to click anything and said the sender address did not match the official reservation system. I already knew that. I had checked it 6 times. I have never gone back to that campground. But every fall, usually near the end of September, I get 1 email. No logo, no phone number, no unsubscribe link. Just a subject line with my last name and a message body containing 1 sentence. Lower loop is quieter. We picked that spot because it was easy to leave. That sounds strange now considering what happened, but it was true. My brother Ryan and I had both camped off Forest Service roads before, and we had a rule about not trapping ourselves for scenery. If a pullout looked pretty but had no room to turn around, we passed it. If the road looked like it would turn to soup after one night of rain, we kept driving. This place checked out. It was about 7 miles off the main highway, tucked along a dry forest road in western Wyoming. Not a real campground. Just a wide dirt pullout with a stone fire ring, a few old shotgun shells near a stump, and enough flat ground for one tent. The road continued past it, but not by much. According to Ryan's offline map, it looped back toward a ridge and rejoined the main forest road farther down. We were not deep in the wilderness. That mattered to me. We had a 4-wheel drive truck with a full tank, recovery straps behind the back seat, a shovel, 2 flashlights, a paper map, extra water. The weather report we had checked before losing signal said clear skies until Monday. We were 2 adults, not kids, sneaking into the woods with a grocery bag of snacks and a dying phone. We got there late afternoon, set the tent near the fire ring, and parked the truck with the front facing the road out. Ryan did that automatically. He always said you should never have to reverse out of a bad situation if you could help it. Nothing felt wrong that first night. We ate canned chili off the tailgate, let the fire burn low, and listened to elk bugling somewhere far below the ridge. I remember thinking how quiet it was after the fire went out. Not creepy quiet, just big, empty mountain quiet. The next morning, I woke up before Ryan and climbed out to take a leak. That was when I saw the tracks. They ran through the mud beside the passenger side of the truck, close enough that I could have stepped from our running board into them. They curved around the rear bumper, stopped behind the tailgate, then angled back toward the road where the ground turned dry and hard. They were not ours. Our tire marks were wider, deeper, and easy to follow from the road into the pullout. These were narrower with a broken tread pattern on one side. Every few inches, one of the grooves disappeared, leaving a clean gap in the mud. Ryan came out of the tent while I was still staring at them. "Hunter," he asked. That was the obvious answer. Hunters use those roads in the fall. So, did Forest Service workers, ranchers, and people looking for free campsites. Someone could have driven in before dawn, realized the spot was taken, and backed out. That was what we told ourselves. Then Ryan crouched behind the truck. The tracks did not just pass through. They stopped there, right behind our bumper. The distance was almost perfect. Just enough room for another vehicle to sit behind us in the dark without touching the truck. Ryan took a picture of the broken tread mark with his phone. Neither of us said why. Ryan wanted to leave the spot right away. Not the forest, not the whole trip, just that pullout. He kept looking at the tracks behind the bumper, with his jaw tight like he was trying to decide whether anger made more sense than fear. I understood the feeling. If someone had driven in during the night, parked behind us, and sat there while we slept, then staying in that exact place felt like pretending we had not been warned. But going home over a set of tire tracks felt ridiculous too. There was no damage to the truck, nothing missing from the bed, no note, no footprints around the tent, no sound we remembered from the night before. We had planned that trip for weeks, and the sky was clear, and the road was still dry enough to drive without trouble. So we made the safer version of the stupid decision. We moved. Ryan picked a second pullout about 2 miles farther along the forest road, closer to the ridge. It was not as pretty, but it had better sight lines. From there, we could see the road coming in from both directions for maybe 50 yards. The ground was harder. The trees stood farther back. There was enough room to turn the truck around without backing up. We packed the tent, kicked dirt over the old fire ring, and drove out slowly. I watched the mirror the whole time. No headlights followed us. No engine noise came through the trees. No dust rose behind us except our own. By the time we reached the second site, I had almost convinced myself we had overreacted. Almost. We set up again this time with the truck parked nose out toward the road. Ryan left the keys in the cup holder. I put the paper map on the dashboard instead of in my pack. Neither of us said we were doing it because of the tracks. That afternoon, we walked up to the ridge to gather deadfall and look around. We stayed within sight of the road most of the time. The view was wide and clean. Dark green hills, pale grass, a strip of highway far below that looked too small to be real. For a while it helped. Then we came back down. The tire tracks were at the edge of the pullout. Same narrow width, same broken groove, same clean gap in the tread every few inches. They came off the road, curved into the site, passed near the place where we had set the tent, then circled behind the truck. Ryan did not say anything at first. He just pulled out his phone and opened the picture from that morning. He crouched beside the new tracks and held the screen near the mud. The pattern matched. Not in the way people say two things match when they are trying to scare themselves. It matched exactly. The broken part of the tread appeared in the same place. Same length, same missing strip, same slight angle where the outer edge pressed deeper than the inner one. I looked back at the road. These could already have been here, I said. Ryan shook his head. They weren't. He was right. We had both walked that side of the pullout when we arrived. The ground had been clean except for our own tire marks and a few deer prints near the brush. These tracks were new, and they did not stay on the main road. They had come into the site, close to the tent, close to the truck, close enough that whoever made them had not been passing through. They had come in for us. We checked the site without leaving the site. That was one of the few smart things we did. Neither of us walked into the trees looking for the vehicle. Neither of us followed the tracks back down the road with a flashlight pretending we were going to solve anything. We knew better than that. If someone was out there, the last thing we wanted was to move away from the truck. Ryan took more pictures. I stood near the tent with the flashlight and watched the road while he worked. He photographed the broken tread marks from different angles, then placed a pocket knife beside one print for scale. The gap in the tread showed clearly in every shot. It looked like one section of rubber had been torn away from the tire, leaving a blank space that repeated over and over in the mud. The tracks told a story I did not like. The vehicle had not just pulled in and turned around. It had entered slowly, gone behind our truck, then curved around the edge of the pullout. One set of marks came close to where we had placed the tent. Not close enough to touch it. Not close enough to say someone had tried to run it over. Just close enough to make it clear they had looked. Ryan found the deepest marks behind the truck. "Sat here," he said. He pointed with the flashlight. The mud was pressed lower there, almost polished smooth in the bottom of the tread. Like the vehicle had stopped for a while with its weight settled in one place. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say heavy trucks left deeper prints when they turned. I wanted to say mud was uneven and we were tired and our brains were filling in details. But I could see it too. I checked my phone again. No service, not one bar. The offline map still worked, but that was all. The nearest highway was maybe 8 miles out if we followed the road correctly. 8 miles of narrow dirt-blind corners and places where two vehicles could not pass without one backing up. Ryan said we should leave. I said we should wait until dawn. We both hated the other option. Leaving at night meant driving a road we did not fully know, while someone or something might already know where we were. Staying meant sitting in a pullout that had already been visited twice by the same unknown vehicle. There was no clean choice, only the choice that seemed less likely to get us stuck in the dark. So we stopped pretending it was a normal campout. We packed the tent but did not fold it. We shoved the sleeping bags and food bin into the back seat. We put the recovery straps, shovel water, and paper map where we could reach them. Ryan turned the truck around so the headlights faced the road out. I kept the keys in my jacket pocket first, then gave them back to him because he would be driving. We decided to wait in the truck until first light. The cab smelled like dust-cold fabric and the leftover chili container we had forgotten to seal. I sat in the passenger seat with my boots still on. Ryan sat behind the wheel with one hand resting near the ignition. We kept the windows up and the doors locked. For a while, nothing happened. That was its own kind of pressure. The forest made small sounds. Branches shifted. Something moved once in the brush behind the old fire ring. Far away, maybe down in the valley, I thought I heard an engine. Then the wind moved and the sound was gone. Ryan whispered, "Did you hear that?" I said yes, even though I was not sure. A little after 2 in the morning, the truck's rear camera clicked on. The screen in the dashboard lit up by itself because Ryan had enabled parking motion detection months earlier after someone backed into him at a grocery store. Usually it picked up stupid things: rain, bugs, a person walking behind the truck. This time the screen showed darkness, just the black shape of the road behind us and the faint gray edge of the pullout. No headlights, no vehicle, no person. Then the camera shut off. Ryan and I stared at the blank screen for a long time after it went dark. Neither of us slept after that. When dawn finally came, it was pale and cold. We stepped out of the truck together. The air smelled like wet dirt even though it had not rained. Behind the bumper was a new tire mark. Fresh mud had been pressed into a sharp, broken tread pattern less than 2 feet from the tailgate. It was cleaner than all the others, newer, and it had not been there when we got into the truck. We did not make breakfast. Ryan started the truck while I shoved the last of our loose gear into the back seat. The tent was still damp with frost at the edges, but I did not care. I rolled it badly and forced it between the cooler and the door. Ryan kept looking at the new track behind the bumper, like he expected it to move if he watched long enough. Neither of us said anything about staying. That part had become simple. We were leaving. The truck rolled out of the pullout just after sunrise. Ryan kept both hands on the wheel and drove slowly enough that I could feel every rock under the tires. The road was worse than it had seemed the day before. Small ruts ran along the edge where runoff had cut through the dirt. In 2 places, the shoulder dropped away into brush, and Ryan had to steer close to the inside bank to keep distance from it. I watched the mirror. For the first mile, I expected headlights. There were none. No dust trail behind us. No engine sound working through the trees. No dark shape appearing at the last bend. Just our truck, our tire noise, and the pale morning light sliding between the pines. After a while, that almost helped. Ryan saw it too. I could tell by the way his shoulders lowered a little. He said maybe it really had been a hunter. Maybe someone had been using the same road and messing with us because they thought it was funny. Maybe the tracks behind the truck were from earlier and we had missed them in the dark. I wanted to believe that. Then we reached the muddy pullout near the last switchback. I remembered it from the drive-in because Ryan had pointed it out as a good turnaround spot if the road got bad. It sat on the outside of the curve with a view down the slope toward the lower forest road, wide enough for one vehicle, muddy enough that anything driving through it would leave a record. Ryan slowed before we reached it. I saw the tracks before he said anything. They came off the main road from the direction of the highway, turned into the pullout, and stopped near the edge where a vehicle would have a clear view of the road below. Then they turned out again. Same narrow tire widths, same missing groove, same broken tread. I felt something in my stomach drop slow and heavy. The tracks were in front of us, not behind, not following our route from camp, in front. Ryan stopped the truck in the middle of the road. "Don't," I said. He did not ask what I meant. He already knew. "Don't get out. Don't check the mud. Don't stand in the open road with our backs to the trees. Don't give whatever this was more time." But he sat there for a few seconds anyway, staring through the windshield at those marks. The mud was fresh. The edges of the tread were sharp. No leaves had blown into the grooves. A small dark spot sat in the center of the pullout, where the vehicle had stopped like oil, or dirty water had dripped there while it waited. That was the thought I could not get away from. If the same vehicle had made the tracks behind our truck at dawn, then it should have been behind us. If it had driven ahead while we packed, we should have heard it. We should have seen dust. We should have met it on the narrow road. But there had been nothing. No sound. No headlights, no vehicle, just the marks already there. Ryan put the truck back into gear. "We keep going," he said. It was the right choice. Going back meant deeper forest. Stopping meant being stuck at the exact place the other vehicle had used to watch the road. The highway was still ahead. Signal was still ahead. People were still ahead. As we passed the pullout, I looked down at the mud. Our tires rolled across the edge of the broken tread pattern and pressed our own marks over it. For 1 second, the two sets of tracks lined up almost perfectly ours on top of theirs, like we were following a path someone else had drawn before we ever reached it. I looked in the side mirror after we cleared the bend. The pullout was empty. No vehicle, no person, only the broken tracks behind us fading into the mud where our own tires had crossed them. We reached the highway 20 minutes later. Neither of us said anything when the pavement appeared. Ryan just turned onto it and kept driving, both hands still locked on the wheel. I looked back once as the forest road disappeared behind us, expecting to see dust rising through the trees. There was nothing. That should have been the end of it. No vehicle had followed us out. No truck had blocked the road. No stranger had stepped from the trees with a rifle or a grin or some explanation that made it all normal again. The whole thing stayed behind us as mud and tire marks and bad sleep. At least that was what I wanted to believe. We stopped at the first gas station with working lights and a cell signal. It sat beside the highway with 2 pumps, a small convenience store, and a cracked concrete lot full of old oil stains. Ryan parked under the canopy instead of by the road. He said it was for the cameras. I did not argue. We got out together. The truck looked normal in daylight. Dust on the doors, mud on the tires, a few pine needles caught under the windshield wipers. Nothing missing from the bed, no broken glass, no note tucked under the handle. Nothing that would make a deputy take one look and understand why we were standing there shaking under a gas station light. Then I saw the rear bumper. There was a smear of dark mud along the lower edge just left of the hitch, not unusual by itself. The whole truck was dirty, but this smear had a shape pressed into it. Ryan crouched before I said anything. A tread mark. Small, partial, only 3 or 4 inches of pattern. But one groove was missing, the same broken gap. We both stared at it. There was no dent, no scratch, no damage that looked like another vehicle had hit us. Just that print pressed sideways into the mud on the bumper, as if a tire had come close enough to leave part of itself there without making a sound. Ryan took pictures. Then he called the sheriff's office. The deputy who spoke to us was polite, which somehow made me feel worse. He asked the questions he had to ask. Did we see the vehicle number? Did we get a plate number? Did anyone threaten us? No. Was anything stolen? No. Did we have photos of the tracks? Yes. Ryan sent everything. The first tracks by the original camp, the matching tracks at the second site, the fresh mark behind our bumper, the pullout near the switchback, the mud on the rear bumper. For a while, the deputy did not call back. When he did, he said it might have been a hunter, or someone scouting campsites, or a road maintenance truck with a damaged tire. He said the Forest Service roads crossed each other in ways that could make a vehicle appear ahead of us without actually following us. I wanted that to be true. Then he asked one question that has stayed with me. Where exactly did you say you camped the second night? Ryan told him the road number and the approximate pullout. The deputy went quiet for a few seconds. Then he said I'd avoid that area for a while. That was all. No explanation. No warning with a report number attached. Just a tone in his voice that made me understand he had heard something before and did not want to say it over the phone. We drove home that afternoon. For the next few days, I tried to make it smaller in my head. A weird hunter, bad timing, one truck with a damaged tire using the same road network. Our fear turning ordinary marks into a pattern because we were exhausted. That worked until I washed the truck. It was parked in my driveway, far from any forest road under clean afternoon light. Ryan had gone back to work. I had the hose in one hand and a sponge in the other, trying to get dried mud out from under the bumper. The smear with the broken tread mark was still there. I sprayed it until the mud softened and ran down onto the concrete. Underneath it on the lower bumper, there was no scratch, no dent, nothing. Just clean metal. I remember feeling stupidly relieved. Then I looked down. The water and mud had pooled behind the truck. Most of it was shapeless, just brown runoff spreading toward the driveway drain, except for one section. In the wet mud on the concrete directly behind my bumper was a tire mark. Not from my truck. My tires were on dry pavement a few feet away, and the tread was completely different. This mark was narrow, one groove missing, same broken pattern. I stood there with the hose running in my hand until the water washed it thin. By the time I thought to take a picture, it was almost gone. That is the part I hate most. I never saw the vehicle. Not once. No headlights, no engine, no shape behind us on the road. Just the proof that it had been close. And the feeling that some things do not need to follow you from behind. They only need to know where you are going to stop next. I used to help close that campground every fall. Not as a ranger. I never had the badge for that. I was seasonal maintenance, which meant I did the jobs nobody noticed unless they were not done. I pulled old permits from plastic sleeves, checked fire rings for trash, shut off water valves, counted damaged signs, locked restroom doors, and wrote down anything that needed replacing before snow came through the mountains. It was boring work most years. That was why I agreed to come back when Kelly called. She had been the district ranger back when I worked summers there, and she still had my number. One of her maintenance guys had quit early, another had the flu, and the campground needed to be closed before the first hard freeze. I had 2 days off, a truck that still smelled faintly like pine sap from old seasons, and enough nostalgia to make the job sound peaceful. I drove in on a gray Tuesday afternoon near the end of October. The campground looked exactly the way I remembered it looking after the last weekend of the season. Empty picnic tables, cold fire rings, brown leaves piled against the restroom doors. The self-pay kiosk had no envelopes left, just a faded map behind scratched plastic. A chain hung loose near the entrance gate, not locked yet because I still needed to move through the loops. Kelly knew I was there. I had texted her from the entrance where the signal was best. My truck was parked beside the maintenance shed. I had a radio, a paper checklist, a flashlight, bolt cutters, gloves, and keys to the storage shed and office. Nothing about the job felt unsafe. That is the part I keep reminding myself. The first wrong thing was in the shed. I unlocked it to grab the tool bucket and a box of replacement permit sleeves. The inside smelled like dust, old gasoline, and damp plywood. Rakes hung on one wall. Broken campground signs leaned in a stack near the back. A bundle of orange cones sat under a shelf full of rusted hinges and spare latches. In the far corner behind an old stop ahead sign, there was a wooden campsite marker. It was marked 23. At first, I thought nothing of it. Campsite markers get damaged. People back into them with trailers. Kids carve initials into them. Sometimes we kept spares in the shed until someone had time to install them. But this one did not have an inventory tag. Every spare marker was supposed to have masking tape wrapped around the bottom with the loop name and replacement date written in marker. This one had nothing, just pale wood black numbers and a cracked plastic permit sleeve screwed to the back. The wood looked newer than it should have. The number 23 was painted thick, darker than the old markers stacked behind it. Under the 3, there was a narrow scrape in the wood, like somebody had tried to remove something before painting over it. I picked it up to check the base. Dried mud fell from the bottom and scattered across the shed floor. That made me pause. The shed had been locked for weeks. The floor was dry. Even the shovels by the door had only dust on them. There was no reason for fresh-looking mud to be clinging to the bottom of a marker stored inside. I told myself one of the other workers must have brought it in recently and forgotten to tag it. That was the easiest answer. So I leaned the marker back against the wall, took a photo for inventory, and wrote one line on my checklist. Unlabeled marker 23 in shed. Then I closed the door and went to start the upper loop. The upper loop took longer than I expected. Not because there was much to do, mostly because everything that gets left behind at a campground seems small until you are the person responsible for counting it. A broken tent stake under Site 18's picnic table. Half-burned aluminum foil in the fire ring at 19. A permit sleeve cracked at 21. A trash bag someone had tied shut and abandoned beside the bear-proof bin. Like tying it somehow made it less abandoned. I wrote it all down. The campground felt normal in that late-season way. Empty, but not wrong. Wind moved leaves across the road in thin scraping lines. Somewhere near the creek, a branch knocked against another branch with the same dry sound every few seconds. My radio hissed once, then went quiet again. By the time I reached the old footpath behind Site 22, I had almost forgotten about the marker in the shed. That footpath had been closed for years. It used to cut down toward a lower loop that the park stopped using after repeated washouts. When I worked there, we called it Old Loop B. Officially, it had been retired before I ever started. The sites down there were pulled from the reservation system, the water was shut off, and most of the markers had been removed. The path was still there, though. A sagging rope blocked the entrance. A faded closed for restoration sign hung from it, even though nobody had restored anything in that section for a long time. That was where the marker stood, right past the rope planted beside the first bend of the closed path. 23. I stopped in the middle of the gravel road. For a few seconds, I tried to make my eyes turn it into something else. A stump. A broken sign. One of the old boundary posts we sometimes use near trailheads. But it was the same campsite marker, same pale wood, same thick black numbers, same narrow scrape under the 3, same cracked plastic sleeve on the back. It had been in the shed less than an hour earlier. I looked back toward the maintenance building. I could see part of its roof through the trees, but not the door. My truck was still parked beside it. No other vehicle sat in the lot. No golf cart, no park pickup, no volunteer's SUV. I lifted the radio. "Kelly, you copy." Static answered first. Then half a word came through, clipped and distant. I tried again and got nothing. That happens sometimes in the upper loop, especially with the ridge behind it. I told myself that was all it was. Bad reception. A spare marker I had somehow misremembered. Maybe someone else had been in the campground before I arrived and moved it for a repair job. But the shed had been locked, and this post was not lying on the ground. It was planted. I stepped over the rope but did not go farther than the marker. The soil around its base was disturbed dark and damp under the leaves. The post felt solid when I touched it. Whoever had put it there had pushed it deep enough that it did not wobble. I took 3 pictures, one from the road, one close-up of the number, one of the scrape under the 3. Then I pulled the marker out of the ground. It came free with a wet sound that made me think of boots coming out of mud. The bottom was caked in dark soil, but underneath that the wood looked clean. Too clean, like it had not been buried long. I carried it back to the shed under one arm. Halfway there, I caught myself walking faster. That annoyed me enough to slow down. I was a grown man carrying a misplaced campsite post through an empty campground. That was the whole situation if I refused to dress it up. At the shed, the lock was still hanging from the hasp exactly the way I had left it after opening the door earlier. Not locked, but looped through because I had planned to come back and forth while working. Inside, nothing looked moved. I set the marker on the workbench instead of leaning it in the corner. Then I took a roll of blue painter's tape from the shelf and put a strip across the bench tight against the base of the post. I marked the outline with a pencil. If it moved again, I wanted to know. That was practical. That was sane. Before I closed the door, I checked the cracked plastic sleeve on the back. There was something caught inside it, a piece of old paper folded small and yellowed at the edges. I pulled it free with my glove. Most of the text had rubbed away, but one printed line was still readable. Departure date. Beside it was a dark smudge shaped like the pad of a thumb. I did not throw the paper away. That is one of those details that sounds obvious now, but at the time I almost did. It looked like trash, old permit scrap, something that had been caught in the sleeve for years and forgotten. Campground paperwork gets everywhere by the end of a season. Wind pulls it loose from posts, rain turns it soft, mice chew the corners. But the smudge bothered me. I put the paper in a clear evidence bag from the office supply drawer. We use them for lost items sometimes. Keys, rings, small things campers called back about after they drove home. Then I went into the office and pulled the inventory binder. The office was really just a back room behind the old kiosk. One desk, 2 file cabinets, a corkboard with outdated emergency numbers, and a shelf full of binders nobody opened unless something had gone wrong. The heater did not work anymore, so the air inside felt colder than outside, with that stale paper smell all old park buildings have. I found the marker inventory from the last 3 seasons. There were notes for Site 21, replacement ordered after snowplow damage. Site 22, permit sleeve cracked. Site 24, repaint needed. Site 25, missing post cap. Nothing for 23. No replacement, no spare, no removal, no note saying a marker had been pulled and stored in the shed. I checked the retired loop list next. Old loop B was there, marked inactive in red pen. Sites 20 through 27 removed from public use. Water disconnected. Tables pulled. Markers removed except boundary posts. That meant there should not have been any Site 23 marker in active inventory at all. I called Kelly again from the office landline. It rang twice, then cut to a busy tone that did not sound like a normal busy tone. Too flat, too steady. I hung up and tried my cell near the window. One bar appeared, disappeared, appeared again. My text to Kelly sat there unsent. I almost left then. I want to be honest about that. I stood in the office doorway with the binder open in one hand and thought about locking everything up, getting in my truck, and telling Kelly the next morning that someone had been messing with old signage. But the job still felt like a job. A weird job, but a job. If there was vandalism, I needed to log it. If an old marker had turned up, I needed to know where it came from. So I opened the incident cabinet. Most folders were ordinary: noise complaint, dog bite, stolen firewood, camper backed into water spigot, a family left without paying after a thunderstorm. Then near the back, I found a thin folder with a label that looked newer than the ones around it. Duplicate marker complaint, Site 23. I read the label twice before I opened it. Inside were 3 pages and a photocopy of a photograph. The first page was an intake note. 2 campers, adult male and older male. Early checkout after reported campsite marker issue. Claimed duplicate marker appeared near closed trail spur. Claimed assigned marker moved during rain. No names were listed on the copy I had, just initials. The second page mentioned a permit discrepancy after checkout. The third page was missing. I knew that because the second page ended mid-sentence and the staple holes showed where something had been removed. I looked at the photocopy last. It was grainy, probably printed from a phone photo. A wooden marker marked 23 filled most of the frame. Behind it, blurred in the lower corner, I could make out a picnic table, the edge of a tent, and what looked like a dark coffee mug sitting near the end of the bench. Under the 3 there was the same scrape. I set the photo down on the desk and stared at it until the room seemed to tilt slightly around the edges. There were still reasonable explanations. The marker in my shed could have been kept after that complaint. Someone might have forgotten to log it. A prank from years ago could have left loose ends in the paperwork. Parks are not clean systems. Things get mislabeled, moved, ignored. But the mud on the base had not been there for years. The marker had been wet today. Something knocked outside. Not loud, not dramatic. Just wood touching gravel. I froze with my hand still on the folder. The sound came from the parking area beside the office where my truck was parked. I waited for another sound. A footstep, a voice, a vehicle door. Nothing came. I picked up the flashlight from the desk and stepped outside. The air had changed while I was in the office. The gray afternoon had flattened into early evening, and the trees around the lot looked darker than they should have. My truck sat where I had left it, back toward the maintenance shed driver's side, facing the office. Beside the rear tire stood the marker, 23. It faced the road out. For a few seconds I did not move. Then I turned and looked toward the shed. The door was closed. The padlock still hung from the hasp. When I opened it, the workbench was empty. The strip of blue painter's tape was still there, outlining the place where the marker had been. I called Kelly from inside the truck. That was the first thing I did after I saw the empty workbench. I locked the office, locked the shed, got into the driver's seat, and tried to make the situation sound like something that belonged in a report. Possible vandalism, unknown person moving, retired signage, old incident file found, marker appearing outside, secured storage. I did not say the marker had moved by itself. I still could not say that. The call connected for maybe 12 seconds. Kelly's voice came through thin and broken, like she was underwater. I heard my name. Then something about leaving if I felt unsafe. Then the line broke apart into static and dropped. I tried to send the photos. The marker at the closed spur. The tape outline on the workbench. The marker beside my truck. The first image stuck at 1%. The second never started. By then, the campground had gone dim. Not dark exactly, but that colorless mountain dim where everything loses distance. The road out was still visible through the windshield. The entrance gate was less than half a mile away. I had keys, a truck, and enough sense left not to turn this into an investigation. So I left. The marker stood beside the rear tire as I pulled away. I did not move it. I did not take the permit scrap from its sleeve. I did not get out and prove anything else to myself. I drove past it with both hands on the wheel and my eyes forward. The first loop was empty. Leaves scraped across the gravel ahead of my headlights. Sight posts flashed by one at a time, old numbers on old wood exactly where they belonged. Site 18, Site 19, Site 21, Site 22, no 23, nothing new, nothing waiting between the trees. That almost made me angry. I wanted the fear to stay consistent. I wanted it to either be something or nothing. Instead, it kept stepping back every time I was ready to run from it. Then I reached the entrance. The chain was across the main gate. It had been hanging loose when I arrived. I knew that because I had driven past it twice. Now it was looped through the metal posts 3 times, pulled tight enough that it sagged only slightly in the middle. There was no padlock. That should have been good news, but it did not feel like good news. It meant I could get out if I got out of the truck, walked to the gate, and spent a minute unwinding cold metal with my back turned to the empty campground. I sat there with the headlights on the chain. My radio hissed once, no voice. I looked at the map on the passenger seat. The service road through Old Loop B connected to a county maintenance road farther down the ridge. It was rough, but not a trail. I had driven it years ago with a park pickup. If the gate was blocked, the service road was the other way out. That was how I justified it. Not curiosity, not bravery, just not wanting to stand at that gate while something behind me knew exactly where I was. I backed up, turned around by the kiosk, and took the narrow road past the maintenance shed toward Old Loop B. The old loop felt colder. The road dipped under thicker trees, and the headlights seemed to lose strength a few feet past the hood. The sights down there were supposed to be retired. Most of the picnic tables had been removed years ago. The water pump was locked. The old restroom building was boarded from the inside. At the first bend, I saw the marker, 23. It stood beside the road with its face turned toward my headlights. I did not stop. I drove past it at maybe 10 miles an hour, fast enough to keep moving, but slow enough not to slide on leaves. In the rearview mirror, the marker vanished into darkness. At the next bend, another one stood near the locked water pump. Or the same one. I do not know which answer is worse. Same pale wood, same black numbers, same scrape under the 3. I kept driving. A third marker waited at the old restroom building. This one stood close to the boarded door, its plastic sleeve reflecting a thin white line from my headlights. I remember gripping the wheel so hard that my fingers hurt, because every part of me wanted to look away, and every part of me knew I needed to keep the road in view. The service road narrowed after the restroom. Branches brushed the passenger side of the truck. Gravel turned to wet dirt. I told myself I was still making the right choice. The county road was ahead. The main gate was behind me. Stopping would be worse. Then the headlights caught the fallen branch. It lay across the road just before the old service gate, not huge but heavy enough that I could not drive over it without risking the undercarriage. Beyond it, I could see the rusted gate standing half open, and past that the pale line of the county road through the trees. I stopped. The engine idled loudly in the closed loop. For a minute I sat there deciding whether I could push the branch with the bumper. Maybe, maybe not. If it rolled under the truck, I would be stuck. If I got out, I could drag it clear in less than 30 seconds. That was what I told myself. 30 seconds. I opened the door. The cold hit me first, then the smell of wet leaves and old wood. I walked to the branch with the flashlight in my left hand and my truck keys hooked around one finger. I kept the driver's door open. I kept the engine running. I did everything a cautious person does when he knows he is making a bad decision for a practical reason. Then my flashlight moved past the gate. The marker stood on the other side, 23, facing me, not beside the road, not at an old site. Directly beyond the gate in the path I needed to take to leave. I did not move the branch. The moment I saw the marker on the other side of the gate, Something in me finally stopped trying to be professional about it. I backed away from the branch with the flashlight still pointed forward, like lowering it would make the marker closer. My heel slipped once in the wet leaves, and for one stupid second I thought I was going to fall there outside my truck with the engine running and the door open. I did not fall. I got back in, slammed the door, and locked it. The marker stayed where it was, pale wood beyond the gate, black numbers facing me, the scrape under the 3 catching the light whenever my headlights shifted with the engine vibration. I put the truck in reverse. That was when the folder slid off the passenger seat. The incident folder from the office had been under the paper map. I must have carried it out without thinking when I grabbed the photos and inventory sheets. It hit the floorboard and spilled open under the dashboard, scattering photocopies across the rubber mat. I almost left them there. Then I saw a page I had not seen before. It was folded in half, tucked inside the old campground map. Not stapled, not punched for the folder, just folded and hidden like someone had put it there because they did not want it filed with the rest. The top line was handwritten, "Do not reassign Site 23. I stared at it while the truck idled and the marker stood in the headlights. The handwriting was narrow and hard-pressed, written by someone angry or afraid enough to dig the pen into the paper. Under the note was a date from years earlier, the same season as the duplicate marker complaint. The rest was written like a field report, but not a clean one. Lines crossed out, words abbreviated, half sentences that looked like they had been written after a phone call or interview. Father and adult son departed before office hours. Reported assigned post moved closer to tent during rain. Photograph shows marker at site though, camper stated photo taken near closed spur. Permit altered after checkout. Scan returned with handwritten arrow near home address line. I read that last sentence 3 times. Home address line. There was no reason that detail should have made me think of anything from my own life. I had never met those campers. I did not know their names. I had only seen a photocopy and 3 pages in a forgotten binder. But my mind gave me a memory anyway. A rainy morning years before, me standing near the maintenance shed in an orange vest, drinking gas station coffee from a paper cup. A truck rolling out of the lower road earlier than anyone should have been leaving. 2 people inside, an older man driving. A younger man in the passenger seat turned halfway around, looking back through the rear window, like he expected something to step into the road behind them. I remembered thinking they must have been tired of the rain. I remembered raising one hand as they passed. Then the memory shifted in a way that made my stomach go cold. They had not come from the upper loop. In my memory, the truck came out of Old Loop B. That was impossible. Old Loop B had already been closed by then. I sat there with the paper in my lap and understood that memory was either wrong or something had made it wrong. Both answers felt like losing ground under my feet. The marker beyond the gate was gone. I noticed that all at once. The headlights still lit the branch, the rusted gate, the wet road beyond it, but the postmarked 23 was no longer standing in the path. I looked into the rearview mirror. It stood behind the truck, not close enough to touch the bumper, not like a jump scare in a movie. It was maybe 15 feet back, centered in the road, upright in the dirt. The plastic permit sleeve on the back faced my truck. Something pale was inside it. My backup camera had come on when I shifted into reverse. The screen was small, grainy, and washed out by the red guidelines, but I could see enough. The sleeve held a fresh permit, not old yellow paper, not a torn scrap. A new printed permit with black text. My name was on it. My license plate was under that. The sight line read 23. Arrival date was today. Departure date was blank. I did not get out. I did not take the permit. I did not decide I needed better proof. There is a point where proof becomes another way to die in the woods. I put the truck in drive and turned the wheel hard toward the shoulder. Branches scraped the side panels. Something snapped under the passenger tire. The truck tilted once as it climbed the soft edge of the road, and for a second I thought I had buried it. Then the tires caught. I drove around the fallen branch, clipped a sapling with the mirror, and forced the truck through the gap beside the old gate. Behind me, the backup camera screen went black. I did not look back again. The service road beyond the gate was worse than I remembered, but it was still a road. Rutted, narrow, half covered with leaves, but pointed downhill. I kept the truck moving. Too fast in places, too slow in others. Every time the road bent, I expected to see the marker waiting in the headlights. I saw it twice, once beside a drainage ditch, once near a broken boundary post. Each time it faced the truck. Each time I kept going. When my phone finally caught signal, it vibrated so hard in the cup holder that I almost swerved. An email notification filled the lock screen. No sender name, no preview image, just a subject line. Your marker has been restored. I did not open it. I threw the phone onto the passenger floor, where it landed beside the folded page from the incident file. The last thing I saw before the screen went dark was that handwritten line again. Do not reassign Site 23. I reached the county road just before dark. There was no dramatic escape, no headlights behind me, no figure in the trees, no last-second turn where the marker appeared in the middle of the road and forced me to swerve. The Forest Service road simply ended, the gravel widened, and then I was on pavement with my hands shaking against the steering wheel. That almost made it worse. Fear wants an ending. It wants something to stop happening, so your body can understand it is over. But nothing stopped. The truck kept moving. The road kept unrolling under the headlights. My phone lay face down on the floor, with that unopened email somewhere inside it. The folded incident page sat beside it, sliding every time I took a curve. At the first gas station, I parked under the brightest canopy light and called Kelly. This time the call went through. I told her enough to make her send someone. Not everything. Not at first. I said there was a possible trespasser in the closed loop. I said retired signage had been moved. I said the main gate chain had been wrapped across the exit and that I had used the old service road to get out. Kelly asked if I was hurt. I said no. She asked if I had confronted anyone. I said no. Then she asked why my voice sounded like that, and for some reason that was the question that almost made me hang up. I told her about the marker. All of it. The one in the shed, the one at the closed spur, the incident folder, the gate, the permit with my name in the sleeve, the email notification. I did not expect her to believe me cleanly. I would not have believed me cleanly. But she did not interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Stay where you are." I did. A sheriff's deputy met me first. Then Kelly arrived in a parked truck with another ranger. We stood beside my truck under the gas station lights while I showed them the photos. The marker in the shed, the marker near the closed path, the blue tape outline on the workbench, the marker beside my truck, the folder pages, the handwritten note. The email was gone. I know how that sounds. But when I picked up my phone and unlocked it, the notification was no longer there. No unread message, no deleted message, no sender in spam, nothing under the subject line. Kelly watched me search for it. The deputy watched too. Neither of them said what I expected them to say. They did not say I imagined it. They also did not say they believed it. They just took pictures of my pictures. The next morning, they went back to the campground without me. I waited at the district office sitting in a plastic chair beside a rack of trail maps, drinking coffee that tasted like burned paper. Every time the office radio cracked, I looked up. When Kelly came back, she looked tired in a way I had never seen before. The shed was locked. The workbench was empty. No marker 23. The blue tape was still there, but there was dirt across it, as if something muddy had rested inside the outline and been lifted away. The closed spur had no post. Old Loop B had no post. The main gate chain was hanging loose, exactly where it had been when I arrived the day before. No sign it had been wrapped across the exit. No fallen branch at the service gate. No fresh tire tracks except mine. The incident folder was still in the office, but the handwritten page was gone. The duplicate marker complaint still had 3 pages. The second page still ended mid-sentence. The third page was still missing. Only now the photocopy was missing too. Kelly asked me if I had taken it. I told her no. She believed me less after that. I could see it. Not because she thought I was lying exactly, more because believing me meant accepting a problem she had no form for. I quit that day. There was no official quitting to do. I was not really employed. I had been helping as a favor and favors end quietly. Kelly told me she understood. She also told me not to post about it online until they could review the campground cameras. There were no usable cameras. Of course there were not. For a week I tried to turn it into a story about trespassing. Someone had access to old records. Someone moved signs. Someone knew the shed key code or had copied it. Someone sent an email from a spoofed address and deleted it somehow. Someone followed me home from the campground without being seen. That last part was the problem, because 1 week later, I found the marker in my garage. It was late around 11:30. I had gone out to grab a screwdriver from the workbench because a cabinet hinge in the kitchen had come loose. The garage light clicked on over my head, slow and yellow. The marker was leaning against the wall beside my camping bins. 23, same pale wood, same thick black numbers, same scrape under the 3. Dried mud flaked onto the concrete beneath it. For a few seconds I could not move. My first thought was not even fear. It was irritation, pure and stupid, like some part of my brain was angry that the thing had crossed a line I had not realized existed. Campgrounds were one thing. My garage was another. The plastic sleeve on the back held a permit. I did not touch the marker. I used the tip of the screwdriver to lift the paper just enough to read it. My name, my home address, Site 23. Arrival date was blank. Departure date was blank. Under notes, one line had been printed in plain black text. Do not reassign. I called Kelly. Then I called the sheriff's office. Then I stood in my driveway until the deputy arrived because I could not stay in the house with the garage door between us. By the time he got there, the marker was gone. Not moved. Gone. The garage door had been open the whole time. I had been standing 20 feet away under the porch light. I had not heard wood scrape on concrete. I had not seen anyone step inside. I had not seen a vehicle pass the house. There was only mud on the garage floor, 2 small flakes of pale wood near the wall, and 1 cracked piece of plastic from a permit sleeve. The deputy looked at the mud, then at me. He asked if I had security cameras. I did. The garage camera showed me opening the door. It showed the light coming on. It showed me standing there with the screwdriver in my hand, staring at something just outside the frame. The marker itself was not visible. The camera angle should have shown it. It showed the wall, empty. But in the audio, very faintly, right before I backed out of the garage, there was a sound. Wood tapping concrete, once. Then nothing. I have moved twice since then. I do not camp anymore. I do not volunteer for parks. I do not stop at campgrounds to use the restroom on road trips. If a reservation website asks for my vehicle plate or home address, I close the page. I still do not know what Site 23 is. I do not think it is a campsite. I do not think it is a loop. I do not think it belongs to any map the Park Service keeps. Maybe it is just a number someone painted over something older. Maybe it is a file that should have been destroyed. Maybe it is a way of marking people who notice the wrong thing and then try to leave. The last permit had no arrival date. That used to comfort me. For a while I told myself it meant I had never really been assigned. Then I remembered the departure date was blank too. And that is the part I cannot stop thinking about. Not where Site 23 is. Not who put the marker in my garage, but the possibility that I am still checked in. If you ever see the same marker twice, do not try to prove it. Do not take a picture. Do not follow it. Just leave. And if it shows up again after that, then maybe you were never the one choosing where to go next.